In a world where power answers only to dominance, one king believed he had mastered the art of control, until the night a forsaken Omega appeared at his gates, swollen with his child and marked by fate itself. She was nothing, a shadow beneath his throne, yet the ancient bloodline burning on her skin screamed a truth that could shatter empires. Destiny does not bow to kings, it breaks them. If you want to see how far a man will fall to protect what he never knew he needed, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where my tribe is watching from. The throne room stank of old blood and older ambition. Oren Vale stood at the center of it all, hands clasped behind his back, jaw carved from granite and eyes like winter over a battlefield. The High Council sat in a horseshoe of polished stone and stiff spines, their faces smooth masks hiding the knives they sharpened in their minds. This was the 47th session since the autumn rains began. 47 times they had gathered to dissect the failing northern territories, the rebel factions breeding in the shadows, and the slow rot creeping through the empire's edges. He did not sit. Kings who sat grew soft. Lord Crevane, ancient and viper-thin, rose from his seat with the creak of old leather and older grudges. His voice carried the rasp of a man who had survived 6 kings before Oren and planned to outlive this one too. Your Majesty, the northern garrisons report another village burned. The rebels grow bolder, they no longer hide. Oren's expression did not shift. Then we stop hunting shadows and start burning roots. Send the 3rd Legion. No prisoners, no negotiations. The room stirred, not with shock, they were long past that, but with the quiet calculation of men weighing which side of history to stand on. Crevane smiled, a thin slice of satisfaction. It was not kindness, it was approval. As you command, Your Majesty. But before the words could settle, the great iron doors groaned open. Not the polite creak of a servant entering, but the violent shriek of metal forced against its will. Every head turned. Oren's hand drifted toward the knife at his belt, instinct honed by a lifetime of assassination attempts and palace coups. A figure stumbled into the light. She was small, thin in the way prey animals are thin, sharp shoulders, hollow cheeks, a spine bent under the weight of something invisible. Her clothes were rags held together by desperation and mud. Her hair, once perhaps brown or black, hung in matted tangles against skin too pale for health. But it was her belly that silenced the room. Swollen, rounded, unmistakably pregnant, and on her neck, just visible beneath the grime and exhaustion, a mark glowed faint gold in the torchlight. The mate mark. The seal of the royal bloodline. The thing that only appeared when an alpha of true lineage bonded with their destined equal. Oren felt the floor tilt beneath him. Not physically, but in the way the world tilts when a lie you built your life upon suddenly cracks. The woman, no, the Omega, lifted her eyes. They were gray, storm gray, the kind of gray that came before lightning. She spoke. Her voice was hoarse, shredded by thirst or screaming or both. I am Alara Voss. I carry your air, and I invoke the blood right of sanctuary. The room exploded. Not in sound, though sound came, gasps, hisses, the scrape of chairs as lords surged to their feet. But in intent, in the sudden realignment of power, the violent shift of every calculation and alliance in that room. Because the blood right was ancient, older than the throne itself, older than the kingdom. It was law written in marrow and enforced by something deeper than swords. If she truly carried the air, if that mark was real, then she could not be touched, could not be turned away, could not be harmed without invoking a curse that had ended bloodlines before. Crevane's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through rot. Lies. She is some peasant whore seeking coin and protection. The mark is false. It must be. Alara did not flinch. She swayed, her hand pressed against the curve of her belly, but her eyes stayed locked on Oren. Only on him. Test it then. Bring your mages, bring your inquisitors. The mark does not lie. Oren moved before thought could interfere. 3 strides brought him down from the dais, past the line of guards who reached for him too late, and directly in front of her. Up close, she smelled of earth and sweat and something else. Something that made his instincts scream mine, even as his mind recoiled. He reached out, slowly. His fingers brushed the mark on her neck. Heat. Not the warmth of skin, but the searing truth of a bond recognized. His own mark, the one burned into his chest during his ascension, flared in response. A twin flame answering a call. The room went silent. Oren's voice, when it came, was low enough that only she could hear. Who sent you? No one sent me. You did this 6 months ago. The Harvest Festival, the Lower City. You do not remember, but I do. He searched his memory. The festival was a blur of wine and politics, and the desperate attempt to forget the anniversary of his brother's death. There had been women, there were always women, offered by lords seeking favor, by merchants seeking contracts, by the ambitious seeking a night with power. He did not remember her, and that more than anything told him she was telling the truth, because the women he remembered were the ones who mattered, the ones who could be leveraged, used, discarded with care. This woman, this Omega, had been invisible, beneath notice, until now. He stepped back. His voice, when he addressed the council, was iron over ice. She stays. Summon the royal physicians. And the blood mages. We verify the claim. Until then, she is under my protection. Any who touch her answer to me personally. Cravane's face twisted, but he bowed. The others followed, a wave of submission that meant nothing. They would obey. And they would sharpen their knives. The chambers they gave her were in the East Wing. Not the royal quarters, not even the noble guest suites, but better than a cell. Stone walls, a narrow bed, a single window barred with iron, a gilded cage for a problem they did not yet know how to kill. Alira sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded over her belly, and waited. She had been waiting for months, waiting for her body to betray her, waiting for the child to quicken, waiting for the courage to walk through those gates and speak words that could end her life. The door opened. No knock. Kings did not knock. Oren entered alone. The guards remained outside, a concession to privacy that was also a test. If she tried to harm him, they would know. If he harmed her, no one would stop him. He stood with his back to the door, arms crossed, and studied her the way a general studies a map before a siege. Speak. From the beginning. Alira met his gaze. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times, but practice crumbled in the face of reality. I worked in the Lower City, a tavern near the East Market. You came in during the festival, alone, disguised. You drank too much. You were broken. I did not know who you were. You did not tell me. And yet you knew enough to find the palace, to invoke the blood right, to carry yourself like someone who expected to be believed. She flinched, not from fear, from the accuracy of the accusation. I learned, after, when the mark appeared, when I realized what I carried. I spent 3 months finding tutors who would teach an Omega to read, to speak, to stand. I sold everything I had. I walked 400 miles, because the alternative was dying in a gutter with your child in my arms. Why not rid yourself of it? Omegas have ways. Her eyes flashed, the first real fire he had seen in her. Because it is mine too, and I do not kill what is mine. Silence. Heavy. The kind of silence where truths settle and futures fork. Oren moved to the window. Outside, the capital sprawled in concentric circles of stone and smoke and human ambition, his empire, his burden, his cage. If the child is verified as mine, you understand what that means. You will be elevated, protected, paraded before the court like a symbol. They will hate you, plot against you, use you to strike at me. I know, and you came anyway. He turned. For the first time, something almost human crossed his face. Not softness, but confusion. The bewilderment of a man who had forgotten that courage existed outside of soldiers and swords. Why? Alira stood, slowly. Her legs shook, but she stood. Because I am tired of being invisible. Because this child deserves a father who is more than a ghost in a tavern. And because you looked at me that night like I was real. Even drunk, even broken. You saw me, no one else ever has. The words hit him like a blade between ribs. Not painful, worse, true. Drag. The blood mages arrived at dawn. 3 of them, hooded and ancient, carrying tools that hummed with power older than the throne. They worked in silence, their hands tracing runes over Elira's skin, their eyes glowing faint silver as they read the threads of fate woven into her flesh. Oren watched from the doorway. He did not trust mages. He did not trust anyone. But their word was law in matters of blood. If they declared the child false, she would be executed by sunset. If they declared it true, the eldest mage turned. Her voice was dust over stone. The mark is genuine. The child is yours, Majesty, and more. The bloodline is pure, undiluted. This heir will carry power we have not seen in 6 generations. The room seemed to inhale. Oren felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like another crown. And the mother? The mage's eyes shifted to Elira. Something unreadable passed across her face. Omega, but not common. There is old blood in her veins, royal blood, distant, forgotten, but present. She is acceptable. Acceptable. The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade, neither falling nor sheathed. Oren dismissed them with a gesture. When they were gone, he crossed to where Elira sat, still trembling from the examination. You are now under full royal protection. You will be moved to the Queen's wing, guarded, clothed, fed. You will attend court. You will be seen, and you will not embarrass me. Her jaw tightened. I am not here to be your ornament. No, you are here to survive. And survival in this place requires more than courage. It requires cruelty. She looked up at him. Her eyes were still storm gray, still defiant. Then teach me. Ek. The court saw her 3 days later. They dressed her in silk the color of winter dawn, pale and cold and beautiful. They pinned her hair with silver that caught the light and made her look almost regal, but they could not hide what she was. The way she moved, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the way her hands kept drifting to her belly as if to protect it from the stairs. The great hall was filled. Every lord, every lady, every snake who had crawled out of the shadows to witness the spectacle. Oren sat on the throne, impassive, while Elira was led to stand beside him. Not on a throne. There was no second throne. She stood. Lord Crevane rose. His voice carried to every corner. My lords and ladies, His Majesty has chosen to recognize the woman Elira Voss and the child she carries. Let it be known that she is under royal protection. Let it be known that any harm to her is harm to the crown itself. Polite applause. The sound of knives being sharpened in velvet gloves. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice. Young, arrogant. Lord Davin, a nephew of Crevan, and a man who had spent his life climbing over corpses to reach the lower rungs of power. And if the child is born weak, or worse. Omega. What then, Your Majesty? Do we crown a broken thing? The hall went silent. This was the question they all wanted to ask but lacked the spine to voice. Oren did not rise. He did not need to. His voice alone could shatter stone. Then we will have one more lord in this hall with something to prove. Like you, Davin. Tell me, how many coups have you survived? How many wars have you won? How many men would die for you rather than wait for you to die? Davin's face flushed. He opened his mouth, closed it, sat down. But the damage was done. The doubt was seated. Elira felt it in the way eyes slid over her, weighing her, measuring her against every future disaster they could imagine. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish back into the invisibility that had kept her safe her entire life. Instead, she did something else. She stepped forward, one step, just one. But in a court where every gesture was language, it was a shout. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried. You fear what I represent. I understand. But fear is a choice, and I choose not to carry yours. The hall erupted, not in applause, in chaos. Half the lords surged to their feet, outrage twisting their faces. The other half remained seated, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of watching a new piece enter the board. Orn's hand shot out. He gripped her wrist, not gently. A warning, a command. But when she looked at him, she saw something else in his eyes. Approval. Ishats. That night, assassins came. Not the clumsy kind. Not the desperate fools hired by minor lords with minor grudges. These were professionals. Silent, efficient, sent by someone with the coin and connections to want her dead before the child was born. They entered through the ceiling, a ventilation shaft too narrow for guards but wide enough for killers who had trained their entire lives to become nothing. 3 of them. Blades coated in poison. Instructions to make it look like natural causes. Illyra woke to the sound of her door locking from the inside. She was on her feet before thought, instinct screaming louder than reason. The first assassin dropped from the ceiling like a spider, blade gleaming. She threw herself sideways, knocked over the bedside table, and the oil lamp shattered across the floor in a puddle of flame. The second assassin came through the window, faster. He had her by the throat before she could scream, lifting her off the ground, her feet kicking empty air. His voice was a whisper. Nothing personal. She clawed at his hand, drew blood. He did not flinch. And then the door exploded inward. Oren moved like violence given form. No hesitation, no wasted motion. His blade took the first assassin through the throat before the man could turn. The second released Illyra and lunged, his dagger aimed at Oren's heart. Oren caught his wrist, twisted, and the snap of bone was louder than Illyra's gasping breath. The third assassin did not fight. He ran, straight for the window. Oren let him go, because a dead assassin was a message sent, but a living assassin was a message received. Illyra collapsed against the wall, hands pressed against her belly, tears and rage and terror mixing into something that tasted like iron. Oren crossed to her, knelt. His hand, still bloody, framed her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man who had just killed 2 people. Breathe. The child is safe. You are safe. She wanted to believe him, but safe was a word that had no meaning in this place. Who sent them? He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something that might have been doubt. Everyone. Anyone. It does not matter. What matters is that they failed, and failure in my court is terminal. He stood, offered his hand. She took it. Let him pull her to her feet. You will not sleep alone again. Guards will be posted inside your chambers, and I will have someone you trust assigned to you, someone who can teach you what I cannot. Who? He smiled. It was not kind, but it was real. My sister. Illyra's blood went cold, because she had heard the stories. Everyone had. The king's sister was a legend whispered in taverns and warned about in nursery rhymes. A woman who had survived 3 assassination attempts before her 10th birthday, who had killed her first man at 12, who had been offered in marriage to 5 kingdoms and refused them all with threats so vile they never asked again. Her name was Qaida Vial, and she did not suffer fools or omegas. Qaida arrived the next morning with the subtlety of a cavalry charge. She was taller than Oren, which seemed impossible, and built like a weapon, all lean muscle and sharp edges. Her hair was cropped short, almost shaved, and her eyes were the same winter blue as her brother's, but somehow colder. She wore leather and steel, not silk, and the sword at her hip was not decorative. She looked at Illyra the way a butcher looks at meat. So, you were the one causing all this noise. Illyra forced herself to stand straight, to meet that gaze without flinching. I did not ask for this. Qaida laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. No one asks for anything in this family. We take, or we die, sometimes both. You want to survive here, you need to learn the difference between being prey and being predator. Right now, you are prey. Soft, weak, breakable. I carried a child across 400 miles. I invoked the blood right in front of the High Council. I survived an assassination attempt last night. I am not weak. Qaida stepped closer. Close enough that Illyra could smell leather and steel and something sharper, the scent of a woman who had spent her life one breath away from violence. Surviving is not strength, it is luck. Strength is what you do when the luck runs out. She circled Illyra like a wolf circling wounded prey. My brother sees something in you. I do not know what, but he does not make mistakes about people, only about trusting them. So I will teach you, not because I like you, not because I think you belong here, but because if you die, he will burn the kingdom to ash looking for whoever killed you, and I am tired of rebuilding. Illyra swallowed. Her throat was dry, but her voice stayed steady. What do I need to learn? Qaida smiled. It was all teeth. Everything. The lessons began immediately. Not in the training yards where the soldiers drilled, not in the grand halls where etiquette was taught, in the crypts beneath the palace, where the bodies of dead kings were entombed and the air smelled of earth and old secrets. Kaida handed her a knife, short, balanced, the kind made for killing up close. First lesson: a blade is only useful if you are willing to use it, not threaten. Use. Can you do that? Illyra looked at the knife, at her reflection in the polished steel, at the woman she was being asked to become. I do not know. Kaida nodded. Honest answer. Better than bravado. But you will learn, because the people who want you dead will not hesitate. They will smile, offer wine, compliment your dress, and then they will slide steel between your ribs while you are still saying thank you. She demonstrated. Fast. A strike that would have gutted Illyra if the blade had been real. Illyra stumbled back, heart hammering. Kaida did not apologize. Again. And this time, do not freeze, Vai. Freezing is death. They trained for hours, until Illyra's hands were blistered, until her arms shook, until the knife felt less like a foreign object and more like an extension of her will. Kaida watched, corrected, pushed. And when Illyra finally collapsed against the cold stone wall, gasping, Kaida sat beside her. You did better than I expected. Most Omegas would have cried by now. Illyra laughed. It was bitter. I cried on the walk here, used up all my tears. Kaida glanced at her. Something almost human flickered in those cold eyes. Good. Tears are useless in this place. Save them for when you are alone, or when you want to manipulate someone. Otherwise, they are just water wasted. Illyra wiped her face. Her hand still shook. Why are you helping me? Kaida was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. Not kind, but honest. Because my brother has spent his entire life building walls. Around this kingdom. Around himself. And you walk through them like they were smoke. I do not know if that makes you dangerous or necessary, but either way, you are here. And I will not watch him destroy himself protecting something he refuses to understand. What do you mean? Kaida stood, offered her hand, pulled Illyra to her feet. He does not remember you, but his instincts do. The bond does. And that terrifies him. Because the last time he let someone matter, they used it to betray him. His brother. His closest friend. Both dead because he trusted the wrong people. She turned to leave. Paused at the entrance to the crypt. Do not make him regret you. Because if you do, I will kill you myself. And I will make it kind. Which is more mercy than anyone else in this palace will offer. Then she was gone. And Illyra was alone in the dark with the ghosts of dead kings and the weight of a warning that felt like a promise. Utig. The weeks blurred. Training with Kaida. Navigating court politics. Learning which smiles were safe and which were poison. Illyra felt herself changing. Not softening, hardening. The edges of her sharpening into something that could cut back. But at night, alone in her chambers with guards outside and shadows inside, she still felt like the woman who had walked through the gates, 6 months pregnant and terrified. She still felt invisible until the night Oren came to her. Not as a king, but as a man. He entered without knocking. She was standing by the window, one hand on her belly, watching the city below. He stopped in the doorway. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, I remember you. She turned. Her heart slammed against her ribs. What? Not your face, not your name, but the feeling. The night of the festival, I was drowning, in grief, in duty, in the weight of a crown that feels like a noose. And then there was you, just there. You did not want anything from me. You did not know what I was. You just listened. He crossed to her, slowly, like approaching something wild that might bolt. I have spent my entire life being a king, being a weapon, being whatever the empire needed me to be. And for one night, I was just a man. You gave me that. Illyra's throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. And then you forgot me. He flinched, the first real wound she had ever landed. Yes, And I have spent every day since you walked through those gates trying to understand how I could forget something that mattered. She wanted to rage at him, to scream, to make him feel every lonely mile she had walked. But what came out instead was, "Do you want this child?" Silence. Heavy. The kind of silence that breaks things. I do not know how to want anything that is not a throne or a war. But I know this. I will protect it. And you, not because of duty, not because of the bond, but because I choose to. It was not a declaration of love. It was not poetry. But it was true. And truth in this place was rarer than gold. Alira reached out, took his hand, placed it on her belly. The child kicked, strong, defiant. Oren's eyes widened. For a moment the king vanished, and in his place was a man who looked terrified and awed in equal measure. "It is real. Yes, it is real." He looked at her. Really looked. Not at the Omega, not at the problem, but at the woman who had walked through fire to stand here. "I will not let them take this from us." She believed him, but belief, as she would learn, was the first casualty of war. Updates. The attack came at dawn. Not on her. On the northern territories. A coordinated strike by the rebel factions, supported by foreign gold and insider intelligence. 3 cities burned in a single night, thousands dead, and a message carved into the gates of the fallen capital. The king bleeds. The empire falls. Oren stood in the war room, surrounded by maps and generals, and the sharp scent of fear masked as strategy. His face was stone. But Alira, standing in the doorway where she was not supposed to be, saw the crack in the foundation. Kervain's voice cut through the noise. They knew our troop movements, our supply lines, our weaknesses. This was not luck. This was betrayal. Every eye in the room shifted, not to Oren, to each other. Because in a court built on suspicion, everyone was guilty until proven otherwise. Oren slammed his fist on the table. The wood splintered. "Find them! I do not care who they are. I do not care who they serve. Find them and bring me their heads." The generals scattered. Plans were made. Armies mobilized. But Alira saw what they did not. Oren was afraid, not of losing. Kings did not fear loss. They feared irrelevance. And this attack, this message, was not about territory. It was about proving that the king was no longer untouchable, that he had something to lose, and everyone in that palace knew what that something was. Kaida found her in this corridor outside the war room. Her face was grim. "You need to leave. Tonight. I will arrange transport. A safe house in the southern provinces. You and the child will be protected." Alira shook her head. "No. This is not a request. You are a target now. The rebels will use you. The court will use you. You cannot fight them all." "I am not running." Kaida grabbed her arm, hard enough to bruise. "This is not about courage. This is about survival. My brother cannot protect you and fight a war. And if he tries, he will lose both. Then he needs to trust me to protect myself." Kaida laughed, bitter, raw. "You have been here 2 months. You have learned to hold a knife and walk without flinching. That does not make you a warrior. That makes you a corpse waiting to happen." Alira pulled her arm free. Her voice was steel over stone. "Then teach me to be more." They stared at each other. 2 women on opposite sides of a divide neither had chosen, but both had to cross. Finally, Kaida nodded. "Fine. But if you die, I am telling your ghost I told you so." The night before Oren left to lead the armies north, he came to her chambers. Not as a king, not as a protector, but as something raw and unfinished. He stood in the doorway. She sat by the fire. The child inside her was restless, kicking against the walls of her womb like it already knew a war was coming. He spoke first. "If I do not return." "You will return. You do not know that. I know you. You do not lose." His laugh was hollow. "I have lost plenty, my brother, my friends, my humanity. I lose every day. I just do it where no one can see." She stood, crossed to him, looked up into eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. "Then stop losing. Stop fighting alone. Let me stand with you. You cannot stand on a battlefield." No, but I can stand in this court, and I can remind you why you fight. Not for the throne, not for the empire, but for the people you choose to protect. He reached out, cupped her face. His hands were calloused, scarred, but gentle. You're going to ruin me. Good. You need ruining. He kissed her. Not soft, not tentative, but with the desperation of a man who did not know if he would get another chance. When he pulled away, his voice was barely a whisper. Do not die while I am gone. Then come back and make sure I do not have to. But he left at dawn, an army at his back and a crown on his head. The court gathered to watch him ride out, banners snapping in the wind, steel gleaming like promises that might be lies. Elira stood on the balcony. She did not wave, did not call out, but she watched until he was a speck on the horizon, until the dust settled, until all that remained was the silence of a palace holding its breath. And then, a hand on her shoulder. She turned. Cravain stood behind her. His smile was thin, poisonous. Alone at last, Lady Voss. How unfortunate. She met his gaze. Did not flinch. I am never alone, Lord Cravain. The king left guards, allies, and consequences for those foolish enough to test them. His smile widened. Guards can be bought. Allies can be turned. And consequences only matter if the king returns. He leaned close. His breath smelled of wine and rot. Pray he does. Because if he falls, you and that bastard child will burn before the ashes settle. He walked away, left her standing there with the weight of a threat that was also a promise. And for the first time since she walked through the palace gates, Elira understood. The war was not in the north, it was here. And she was standing at the center of it. The palace became a chessboard where every piece wore a smile and carried a blade. Elira stood in her chambers, staring at the mark on her neck in the polished bronze mirror. The mate bond pulsed faint gold, a constant reminder that she was bound to a man who might not return, that she was valuable only as long as the child in her belly drew breath. That survival here required more than courage. It required calculation. Qaida entered without knocking. She never knocked. In her hand, a sealed letter bearing the royal crest. From the front. 3 days old. He lives. The northern city is retaken, but the cost was high. 2,000 dead. The rebels retreated into the mountains. Elira took the letter, broke the seal. Oren's handwriting was sharp, efficient, stripped of anything that might be called sentiment, but at the bottom, a single line that made her throat tighten. Do not trust anyone, not even those who claim to serve me. She looked up at Qaida. Does that include you? Qaida's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Especially me. But you are still breathing, so perhaps I am the exception. Or perhaps I am just patient. She crossed to the window, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword. A habit. A tell. Elira had learned to read those in the weeks since Oren left. Cravain called a council session for tonight, without the king. He claims it is to discuss supply lines and reinforcements. But that old snake does not call meetings to discuss logistics. What does he want? To test the waters. See who stands with you, who stands against, who can be bought. You will attend. They did not invite me. You are carrying the air. You do not need an invitation. You take your place or you admit you are powerless. And in this court, powerlessness is a death sentence with extra steps. Elira felt the child shift inside her. 7 months now. Large enough to be obvious. Large enough to be a target. What do I say? Qaida turned. Her eyes were winter and warning. As little as possible. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. And when they ask you a direct question, because they will, answer with a question. Make them commit first. Never give them certainty to weaponize. It sounded exhausting. It sounded like survival. Teach me. Qaida almost smiled. I already am. The council chamber smelled of old wood and older ambitions. The horseshoe of stone seats was filled, every lord present, every face a mask of polite interest. Cravain sat in the center, his thin frame draped in dark robes that made him look like a vulture dressed for dinner. Elira entered alone. No guards inside. Council rules. No weapons visible. Tradition. Just her and the wolves in silk. Every head turned. The room did not gasp. It calculated. She walked to the empty seat at the end of the horseshoe. Not the king's seat, that remained vacant, a throne of absence, but close enough to claim proximity, to remind them she was not a guest. Cravain's voice cut through the silence like a blade through fog. Lady Voss, how unexpected. We did not anticipate your presence. Illyra sat, slowly, arranged her skirts with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice was level, bored even. The air I carry has a stake in these discussions. I attend on his behalf. A ripple moved through the room. Not shock. Acknowledgement. She had played the only card that mattered, bloodline. Lord Davin, young and stupid and eager to prove himself, leaned forward. And if the child is born Omega, does it still have a stake, or do we simply have a new mouth to feed? Illyra did not look at him, kept her eyes on Cravain, because the boy was a pawn. The old man was the player. That is a question for the blood mages and the king. I am merely ensuring the child's interests are not forgotten in his absence. Cravain smiled. Thin, sharp. Of course, we would never forget the child. Or you. After all, you have become quite the symbol, a reminder that even the lowest can rise, if fate wills it. There it was, the blade hidden in compliment, the reminder that she did not belong, that her presence was luck, not right. Illyra met his gaze, did not blink. Fate has a habit of surprising us all, Lord Cravain. I imagine that is why we take precautions. Build walls, poison food, hire assassins. The room went cold. She had just named the unspoken, dragged the violence from shadow into light. Davin's face flushed. He surged to his feet. I accuse no one. I merely observed that someone tried to kill me, that the attempt failed, and that those responsible have yet to answer for it. Cravain raised a hand. Davin sat. The old lord's smile never wavered. An unfortunate incident. We are conducting inquiries. Rest assured, justice will be served. Justice or convenience. Sometimes it is difficult to distinguish between the two. Another ripple. This time, a few lords exchanged glances. Not support, but awareness. She had teeth, small ones, but teeth nonetheless. Cravain shifted tactics. He was too experienced to be baited. Let us discuss the matter at hand. The northern campaign drains our coffers. The king requests additional troops and supplies. Some of us question whether this war can be won, whether it is wise to continue bleeding resources for a territory that may be lost regardless. Illyra's instincts screamed. This was the trap. Agree with him, she undermined Orin. Disagree, she revealed herself as blindly loyal and easy to manipulate through appeals to the king. She remembered Kaida's words. Answer with a question. What would you propose instead, Lord Cravain? Withdrawal, negotiation, surrender. The word hung in the air. Surrender. A word no one had dared speak aloud, because to speak it was to admit weakness, and weakness invited predators. Cravain's eyes glittered. Strategic retreat. Consolidation of forces. A pause to reassess. The king is a brilliant tactician. Surely he can see the value in preserving what we have rather than chasing what we may never hold. It sounded reasonable. That was what made it poison. Illyra placed her hands on the table. Fingers spread, the mate mark on her wrist visible, a silent reminder of what she represented. I am not a general. I am not a tactician, but I know this. The moment you retreat is the moment you teach your enemies that pressure works, that if they strike hard enough, long enough, you will break. And once they learn that lesson, they will apply it everywhere, to every border, every city, every life in this empire. She stood, slowly. Let the weight of her belly, of the air, fill the silence. If the king believes the North can be held, then it will be held. Not because I trust his tactics, but because the alternative is teaching our enemies that we are already defeated. And I did not walk 400 miles to stand in a court of cowards. She left. Did not wait for dismissal. Did not look back. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her steps were steady. Behind her, the council erupted. She did not hear the words, did not need to. She had just declared war. But Kaida was waiting in the corridor. Her face was unreadable. That was either brilliant or suicidal. I have not decided which. Alira's hands trembled. She shoved them into the folds of her dress. He called it strategic retreat, but it was surrender dressed in silk. And if the council agrees, they will not. Not all of them. You just gave the loyalists a banner to rally behind, and the traitors a target to aim at. So I made things worse. Kaida's expression shifted, something almost like pride. No. You made things clear. Ambiguity is where betrayal breeds. Clarity forces people to choose, and choice is where loyalty dies or is born. They walked in silence through the echoing halls. Guards stood at intervals, their faces blank, their eyes tracking. Alira wondered how many reported to Cravain, how many would slit her throat for the right price. Kaida stopped outside Alira's chambers. Her voice dropped low. There is something you need to know. Cravain has been corresponding with the rebel leadership. We intercepted a courier 3 days ago. He is offering them terms, a negotiated peace in exchange for recognition of their territory. And your head on a pike. Alira felt the floor tilt. Not metaphorically, the world actually seemed to shift beneath her feet. Orin knows. Yes. That letter you received. The warning. It was not general advice. It was specific. He knows Cravain is preparing a coup, but he cannot act until he returns. And he cannot return until the North is secured. So I am bait. You are a linchpin. The coup will not happen while the heir lives, but the moment the child is born, the moment you are no longer carrying the next generation, you become expendable. Unless what? Unless you stop being a victim and become a threat. How? Kaida leaned close. Her breath was cold mint and sharper intent. You prove the old blood in your veins is not just history. You prove you are royal, not by birth, by right, and that means doing something no Omega has done in 3 generations. What? Take a seat on the council. Officially. Alira laughed. It sounded broken even to her own ears. They will never allow it. They do not have to allow it. The king does. And he is not here to object. So you claim it. Tomorrow. In open court. You walk in, you sit in the empty seat beside the throne, and you dare them to remove you. That is insane. Yes, but it is also the only move they will not expect. And in this game, the unexpected is the only advantage you have. What? Alira did not sleep. She stood by the window, one hand on her belly, the other on the knife Kaida had given her weeks ago. Small, sharp, a promise, and a threat. The city below was a sprawl of light and shadow. Fires in the lower districts where the poor burned whatever they could find to keep warm. Torches in the upper rings where the wealthy pretended the empire was not bleeding. She thought about the woman she had been. The tavern worker who served drinks and smiled at strangers and believed invisibility was safety. That woman was dead, killed somewhere between the palace gates and the first assassination attempt. What remained was something rawer, angrier. A thing that had learned cruelty was not strength, but necessary armor. The door opened. She spun, knife already in hand. A figure stepped into the firelight. Not an assassin. Worse. Lord Cravain. He smiled, raised his empty hands. Peace, Lady Voss. I come unarmed, merely to talk. She did not lower the knife. Talk quickly. My patience has limits. He moved to the chair by the fire, sat without invitation. His movements were slow, deliberate, the gestures of a man who had survived by making himself unthreatening until the moment he struck. You made quite the impression today. The council is divided. Some see you as an upstart, others as a curiosity. A few, very few, see you as what you truly are. And what is that? A complication. He steepled his fingers. The firelight turned his face into a mask of shadow and bone. I have served 6 kings, Lady Voss. I have seen empires rise and crumble, and I have learned one immutable truth. Power is not inherited, it is taken. Your child, if it lives, will inherit a throne. But that does not mean it will keep it. Is that a threat? It is an observation, and an offer. She waited. The knife was steady in her hand now. Cravain leaned forward. Align yourself with me, publicly. Denounce the Northern campaign as the folly it is. When the king returns, if he returns, you will have the council behind you. You will be untouchable, and your child will rule an empire that is whole, not shattered by pointless wars. And if I refuse, then you will die. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. And your child will be raised by regents who will teach it that weakness is inherited, that omegas exist to be used, and when it comes of age, it will be crushed by the weight of a legacy it was never strong enough to bear. The room was silent except for the crackle of fire and the thud of her heartbeat. Alira spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I walked 400 miles with this child in my belly. I survived assassins. I stood before the council and called you cowards. I carry the mate mark of a king, and you think I will kneel to you because you threaten my future. Cravain's smile faded. I do not expect you to kneel. I expect you to be reasonable. Reasonable. That word again. The word that meant surrender, dressed as wisdom. Alira stepped closer. The knife caught the firelight. Here is my counteroffer, Lord Cravain. You withdraw your correspondence with the rebels. You support the king's campaign. And when he returns, I will not mention this conversation. I will let you keep your head and your titles and whatever scraps of dignity you have left. His face hardened. The mask slipped. What remained was old and vicious and tired of pretending. You are a fool, just like your king, bound by sentimentality and symbols. This empire does not need more warriors. It needs pragmatists, people willing to do what must be done. Then do it. Try to kill me. Try to take the child. See how well pragmatism serves you when the king returns and finds me gone. Cravain stood. His movements were stiff, angry. He walked to the door, paused. You will regret this, Lady Voss. Not today, but soon. Because the one thing this empire cannot afford is another idealist. We had one. His brother. He died screaming in a cell, betrayed by the very ideals he cherished. He left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a tomb ceiling. Alira's legs gave out. She collapsed into the chair Cravain had vacated, knife still clutched in her shaking hand. She had just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the kingdom, and she had no idea if Oren would return in time to save her from the consequences. The next morning, Alira walked into the great hall and sat in the seat beside the throne. The court was in session, minor disputes being settled, trade agreements being reviewed, the mundane machinery of empire grinding forward despite the war gnawing at its edges. When she entered, the hall fell silent, not the polite silence of respect, the shocked silence of witnessing something impossible. She walked the length of the hall, her hand resting on her belly, her spine straight, her eyes forward. The empty seat, the queen's seat, unused since Oren's mother died 2 decades ago, waited like a judgment. She sat. The cushion was cold, the stone beneath it older than the kingdom itself. She felt the weight of history press down on her shoulders like a crown made of lead. Lord Cravain, presiding in the king's absence, stood frozen. His face was bloodless. Lady Voss, that seat is not... I am the king's mate. I carry the heir. This seat is mine by right and by blood. If you disagree, summon the blood mages. Let them declare otherwise. The hall erupted, lords shouting, ladies whispering behind fans, guards shifting, hands drifting toward weapons, unsure where loyalty lay. Kaida, standing near the entrance, met Alira's eyes across the chaos. She nodded. Once. Approval or acknowledgement, or maybe just recognition that the board had shifted. Cravain's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. This is unprecedented. Irregular. The council must convene. The council convened yesterday. I was present. I participated. No one objected then, because you were a guest, not a member. And yet here I sit. So perhaps the distinction is less clear than tradition suggests. An older lord, Lord Ferran, white-haired and bent with age, rose slowly. His voice was reedy, but firm. The girl has a point. The mate bond has not been disputed. The child is verified. By law, she holds rank second only to the king himself. If she chooses to exercise that rank in his absence, we have no legal grounds to remove her. Cravain's jaw clenched so hard Alira heard teeth grind. This is a mistake. Alira met his gaze. Did not blink. Then let history judge it. Until the king returns, I will attend all council sessions. I will hear all disputes, and I will ensure the interests of the heir and the empire are protected. If that troubles you, Lord Crevane, I suggest you address your concerns to His Majesty upon his return." She leaned back. Let the weight of the seat support her. Let the court see her not as a frightened Omega, but as something else. Something that did not yet have a name but was growing teeth. Crevane sat. The session resumed. Disputes were heard, agreements were made, and through it all, Illyra sat in the queen's seat and learned that power was not something you were given. It was something you took and dared the world to take back. That night, 3 more assassination attempts. The first came through poisoned wine. She did not drink it. Qaeda had taught her to never consume anything not prepared in her presence. The second came through a servant with a blade hidden in a laundry basket. The guard stopped him, barely. The third came through her window. A crossbow bolt that would have taken her through the throat if she had been standing where she was supposed to be. But she had learned to never stand in predictable places. After the third, Qaeda moved into her chambers. Not asking permission, just arriving with weapons and a bedroll and a grim expression that said this was war now. No more pretending. They sat by the fire, neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Qaeda broke the silence. 3 attempts in one night. Someone is getting desperate. Or testing defenses, possibly both. Crevane, probably, but he is too smart to be directly involved. He will have used intermediaries, hired blades with no connection to him. If we kill them, we gain nothing. If we torture them, they will die before talking. Then what do? We change the game. Stop playing defense. Start attacking. How? Qaeda's smile was all teeth and no warmth. We find the courier. The one carrying messages between Crevane and the rebels. We intercept him. We forge a reply that makes the rebels think Crevane is betraying them. And we watch the old snake scramble when his allies turn on him. Illyra stared at her. That is ruthless. Yes, welcome to the family business, but if it fails, then we die. But we were going to die anyway. At least this way we take him with us. The fire crackled. Outside, the city slept, or pretended to. Illyra thought about the woman she had been, the one who believed kindness mattered, who thought survival was enough. That woman would have refused, would have clung to morality like a shield, but that woman was dead. What remained said, "Do it, Bakats." The courier was intercepted 2 days later, not killed, captured, quietly. In an alley near the East Market where messages were passed and coins exchanged and secrets sold like bread. Qaeda brought him to the crypts, bound, gagged, terrified. Illyra stood in the shadows and watched as Qaeda worked, not with torture, with truth. You have 2 choices. Give us the message and walk away with your life and a purse of gold, or refuse and be found tomorrow morning floating in the river. Your loyalty to Crevane is admirable, but he will not mourn you. He will simply hire another. The courier looked between them, saw Qaeda's cold certainty, saw Illyra's pregnant belly and the knife at her hip, and the realization that desperation had made them both capable of things that should have been impossible. He talked. The message was simple, coded. But Qaeda had been breaking codes since she was 12. Crevane was offering the rebels safe passage into the capital, a coordinated strike during the king's absence, assassination of loyalist lords, seizure of the treasury, and the removal of Illyra Voss from the line of succession, permanently. Illyra felt cold settle into her bones, not fear. Something darker, the realization that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. Qaeda looked at her. What do you want me to do with him? Illyra met the courier's eyes, saw the fear there, the desperate hope that she was still soft, still weak. Pay him, let him go, but make sure Crevane knows we intercepted the message. Let him know we are coming for him. Qaeda's eyebrows rose. You want him to know. I want him afraid. Fear makes people sloppy. And sloppy people make mistakes. The courier was released. The gold was real. But so was the message. Crevane would wake tomorrow knowing his web had holes, that the prey was hunting back. The king returned 4 days later, not in triumph, but in survival. His army was smaller. The banners were torn. The soldiers moved with the exhausted precision of men who had seen too much death and expected more. Oren rode through the gates as dawn broke, his face carved from stone in exhaustion. He dismounted in the courtyard, handed his horse to a stable hand, and walked toward the palace without pause. Elira met him at the steps. She had been waiting since the scouts reported his approach. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes tracked from her face to her belly, larger now, impossible to hide, and something in his expression cracked. "You are alive. So are you." He climbed the steps, stopped in front of her. His hand rose, hesitated, then touched her cheek with a gentleness that did not match the blood under his nails. "I was told there were attempts, multiple, 7 in total. I am harder to kill than expected." His jaw tightened. The gentleness vanished. What remained was the king, the weapon. Who? She told him. Not everything, but enough. Cravane's correspondence, the assassination attempts, the council seat she had claimed. With each word, his expression grew colder, harder. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then, "You sat in the queen's seat." "I did, without my permission. I did not need your permission. I needed to survive. And survival required making it clear I was not disposable." He stared at her. She stared back. Two people bound by fate but separated by the roles they had been forced to play. Finally, he nodded. "Good. You have learned. Learned what? That kings are not the only ones who can rule. That thrones are claimed, not given. And that you are mine not because I own you, but because you chose to stand when any reasonable person would have run." He took her hand, led her inside. The court watched from windows and doorways. Whispers spread like fire through dry brush. The king had returned, and he had not repudiated the Omega who sat in his mother's seat, which meant the war was about to get much worse. The execution came at sunset. Oren did not waste time with trials, did not bother with the pretense of justice. He summoned Lord Cravane to the throne room, surrounded by guards, and spoke 3 words. "You are finished." Cravane did not grovel, did not beg. He stood with the dignity of a man who had played the game longer than anyone and knew when the board had turned. "You have proof of nothing, accusations, hearsay, the ramblings of a desperate Omega." Oren gestured. Kaida stepped forward. In her hand, the intercepted letters, the courier's testimony, the names of 3 lords who had already confessed under interrogation. Cravane's face went gray. "This is a misunderstanding, political maneuvering, not treason." Oren stood, descended the dais, stopped inches from the old lord. "You tried to kill my mate. You conspired with my enemies. You sold my kingdom for the promise of power you would never live long enough to enjoy. That is not maneuvering. That is suicide." He drew his blade. Not a ceremonial sword, a killing blade. The one he had carried through the northern campaign, still stained with dried blood. Cravane's composure cracked, just for a moment. Fear flickered in his eyes. "Your Majesty, please, I have served this kingdom for—" "You have served yourself, and that service ends now." The blade was quick, efficient. Cravane's head hit the floor before his body understood it was dead. The court stood in shocked silence, not because they mourned him, but because they had just witnessed a king become an executioner, and executioners did not stop at one. Oren turned. Blood dripped from his blade. His voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Let this be a lesson. Betrayal is not political strategy. It is death. And I will personally deliver that death to anyone foolish enough to test me again." He looked at Elira. She stood beside the throne, in the queen's seat, right where she belonged. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the court understood. The Omega was not a victim. She was a queen, and the king would burn the empire to ash before he let anyone take her from him. That night, in the privacy of the royal chambers, Oren finally allowed himself to break. He stood by the window, hands braced against the stone, shoulders shaking with exhaustion or rage or grief. Elira could not tell which, maybe all 3. She crossed to him, placed her hand on his back, felt the tension coiled beneath muscle and skin. "You did what had to be done. I executed a man without trial, without hesitation. I have become exactly what my enemies claim I am, a tyrant, or a king protecting what matters." He turned. His eyes were bloodshot, haunted. I killed my brother, Elira. Did you know that? Her breath caught. What? Not with my own hands, but with my silence. He wanted to reform the kingdom, end the dominance hierarchies, give Omegas rights. The council saw it as weakness. They conspired against him, and when they came to me, asked me to support their removal of him, I did nothing. I let them arrest him, let them execute him for treason, because I believed the throne mattered more than one man's ideals. He laughed. It was broken glass in darkness. And now here you are, an Omega, demanding the same things he died for. And I am defending you, killing for you, burning the empire to keep you safe. The irony would be poetic if it were not so damn tragic. Elira took his face in her hands, forced him to look at her. You cannot undo the past. You cannot save your brother, but you can save this child. You can save me. And maybe, if we survive this, we can build something that makes his death mean something. He closed his eyes, leaned into her touch like a man drowning, and she was air. I do not know how to be anything other than what I am. A weapon. A throne. A man who breaks things to keep them whole. Then break the things that deserve breaking, and protect the things worth saving. Starting with us. He kissed her. Not gently, with the desperation of a man who had spent weeks believing she was already dead and was only now accepting she was real. When they pulled apart, his voice was raw. If I lose you, you will not. You do not know that. No, but I know you, and you do not lose. Geek. The child came early, 3 weeks before the blood mages predicted. In the middle of the night, with pain that ripped through Elira like a blade made of fire, Kaida was there first. Then the midwives. Then Auron, who dismissed protocol and every law of tradition and stood beside her through the entire ordeal. The labor lasted 8 hours. 8 hours of agony and terror and the visceral understanding that her body was tearing itself apart to bring life into the world. And then a cry. Sharp, angry, alive. The midwife held up the child, bloody, squirming, perfect. A boy, Your Majesty, healthy, strong. Auron stared at the child like he was seeing a ghost, then at Elira, then back at the child, his son, the heir, the future. And in that moment, everything changed, because a king could risk himself, could gamble with his own life. But a king with an heir had something irreplaceable to lose. Elira reached for the child. The midwife placed him in her arms. He was warm, real, hers. Auron knelt beside the bed. His hand, still bloody from the execution earlier, touched the child's head with a reverence that seemed impossible from a man made of steel and violence. What do we name him? Elira looked at the child, at Auron, at the future they had carved from blood and defiance. Theron. It means hunter, because he will have to hunt for his place in this world, and he will find it. Auron nodded, stood, addressed the room. Theron Vale, heir to the throne, prince of the realm, let it be recorded. The midwives bowed. Kaida, standing guard at the door, allowed herself the smallest smile, and Elira, exhausted and triumphant and terrified, looked at her son and understood. She had not just survived, she had won. But as the door opened and a servant entered with news that made Auron's face go pale, she realized the war was far from over. The servant spoke quickly, breathlessly. Your Majesty, the rebels have breached the southern wall. They are in the city, and they are heading for the palace. The palace bells rang once, a single toll that cut through the night like a blade through silk. Not the call to arms, not the warning of siege, but the death knell. The sound reserved for when the throne itself was under direct threat, when the empire balanced on the edge of collapse, and everyone inside the walls understood that survival was no longer guaranteed. Auron moved before the echo faded. His hand closed around the hilt of his sword, instinct overriding exhaustion. He turned to the midwives, his voice stripped of everything except command. Take the child. The Queen's wing. Inner sanctum. Seal the doors. No one enters without my personal seal or Kaida's blade. The head midwife hesitated. Her eyes flickered to Elira, still pale and trembling from birth, still bleeding onto sheets that had been white an hour ago. Your Majesty, she cannot be moved. Then she stays here with enough guards to hold a siege. Kaida. His sister was already moving. She crossed to the bed, her face carved from ice and calculation. I will stay with her. You handle the breach. If they reach this chamber, we are already dead anyway. Oren's jaw tightened. The tension between protecting his mate and defending his kingdom played across his features like a battlefield map being redrawn in real time. This was the impossible choice every king feared. The moment when personal and political collided and both demanded sacrifice. He looked at Elira. She held their son against her chest, her arms wrapped around him with a ferocity that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with will. Her eyes met his. Storm gray, unafraid. Go. Win. Come back. 3 commands. Each one impossible. Each one necessary. He bent, kissed her forehead. The gesture lasted less than a heartbeat, but carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. Then he was gone. The door slammed behind him, and Elira heard his boots pounding down the corridor, heard him shouting orders, heard the machinery of war grinding to life. Kaida moved to the window. Below, the palace grounds swarmed with movement, torches, soldiers, and something else, shadows that moved too fast, too coordinated. Not a mob, an army. She turned back to Elira. How much can you move? Elira tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest. Everything from her waist down felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together with barbed wire. Not much? Not fast? Kaida crossed to the armory chest every royal chamber contained. She pulled out 2 short blades and a crossbow. Then we make this room a fortress. If they breach the door, you take Theron and you run for the servants' passage behind the tapestry. It leads to the Undercroft. From there, tunnels to the lower city. Do you understand? I cannot run. I can barely stand. Then you crawl. You drag yourself through blood and stone if necessary. But you do not let them take that child. Outside, the sounds of fighting grew louder. Steel on steel, screaming, the wet crunch of bodies hitting stone. And something else. Something that made Elira's blood turn to ice. Laughter. Not the wild laughter of chaos. The controlled laughter of people who were winning, who had planned this, who knew exactly what they were doing. Kaida heard it too. Her expression did not change, but her grip on the blade tightened. This is not a random assault. This is coordinated. Professional. Someone let them in. Who? That is the question that will get us all killed if we do not answer it fast enough. Oren reached the inner courtyard as the first wave hit. They came through the southern gate like a flood breaking a dam. 50 men. Maybe more. Armed with steel that gleamed too bright, too new. Equipment that cost coin most rebels did not have. Training that showed in the way they moved. Formations tight, strikes precise. No wasted motion. These were not farmers with pitchforks. These were soldiers. The palace guard met them at the choke point between the outer and inner rings. For 3 minutes, it was a slaughter. For 3 minutes, Oren believed they could hold. Then the explosions started. Not from the gate, from inside the palace. 3 blasts, simultaneous, precise, taking out the barracks, the armory, and the guard station that controlled access to the royal quarters. Oren felt reality tilt, not from shock, from understanding. Someone had planned this from the inside, someone with access to the palace layout, someone who knew exactly where to strike to cripple their defenses, someone close. He spun toward Lord Ferran, the old counselor who had stood beside him through the Crevane affair, the man who had supported Elira's claim to the council seat, the one lord he had trusted when trust became a luxury. Ferran was smiling, not broadly, just a small curve at the corner of his mouth, the smile of a man watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. Oren's blade was at his throat before the old man could blink. You. Ferran did not flinch, did not plead. He met Oren's eyes with the calm certainty of someone who had already won. Me. And 12 others on the council, and half your personal guard. Did you truly believe Crevane acted alone, boy? He was a chess piece, a distraction. While you were busy executing him, we were opening the gates. Why? Because your brother was right. This empire is built on cruelty, on dominance hierarchies that crush anyone born in the wrong caste. And you were supposed to continue that legacy. Instead, you brought an Omega into the throne room. You gave her power. You legitimized the idea that bloodline does not matter, that strength can come from weakness. Oren's hand trembled, not from fear, from rage so pure it felt like fever. So you burned the kingdom. No, we rebuild it. After we remove you and that abomination you call an heir, after we restore order, after we remind the lower castes that their place is beneath our boots, not beside our thrones. Oren drove the blade forward, felt resistance, felt the wet heat of blood, watched Ferran's smile fade into shock, and then nothing. But the damage was done. The betrayal was complete. Around him, the palace guard began to fall. Not from external assault, from internal collapse. Soldiers turning on each other. Blades that should have defended instead finding backs they knew intimately. The coup was not coming. It was already here. In the royal chamber, Alira heard the explosions and understood what they meant. The walls were not just being breached. They were being demolished from within. This was not defense. This was triage. She looked at Qaeda. Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her limbs. We need to move. Now. Qaeda nodded. She crossed to the bed, slid one arm under Alira's shoulders. Can you hold him? Yes. Alira clutched Theron against her chest. He had stopped crying. Perhaps he sensed the danger. Perhaps infants understood survival on some primal level that adults spent lifetimes forgetting. His eyes were open, bright, watching. Qaeda hauled her upright. Alira's vision blurred. Pain exploded through her body like liquid fire. She tasted copper, felt warmth spreading down her legs that was either blood or proof she could no longer control her own body. She stood anyway, because falling meant death. For her, for Theron, for whatever future they had clawed from the ruins of tradition. They moved toward the tapestry. Qaeda ripped it down one-handed, revealing the servant's door hidden behind centuries of woven silk. She kicked it open. The passage beyond was dark, narrow. It smelled of dust and old stone and the ghosts of people who had fled through here before. Alira took one step, then another. Each movement was agony measured in inches. Behind them, the chamber door exploded inward. Not picked, not broken. Exploded. Someone had used powder charges. Someone who did not care about stealth anymore. 3 men poured through the smoke, soldiers in stolen palace livery. Their faces were covered, but their intent was clear in the blades they carried and the way they moved, directly toward Alira. Qaeda shoved Alira into the passage. Run! Do not stop! Do not look back! Then she turned, 2 blades in hand, 3 enemies in front of her. Odds that would have made most fighters surrender. Qaeda was not most fighters. Alira ran, or what passed for running, a stumbling, agonized lurch down stone steps worn smooth by centuries of fleeing royalty. She heard fighting behind her, heard Qaeda's battle cry, wordless and feral and somehow beautiful in its pure defiance. Then silence. Alira did not look back. Could not. Because looking back meant accepting what that silence implied, and she could not carry that weight, and Theron both. So she ran, and the darkness swallowed her. Oren fought his way through the courtyard with a savagery that bordered on art. Each strike was economical, each kill necessary. He moved through enemies like a blade through water, dividing them into those who would die now and those who would die next. There was no mercy in his movements, no hesitation, just the cold mathematics of survival. But mathematics could not overcome betrayal. For every enemy he cut down, another guard turned. Another soldier revealed themselves as a conspirator. The numbers were wrong. The tide was turning. And then he heard the scream. Not from the courtyard. From above. From the direction of the royal chambers. Everything in him screamed to go, to abandon the battle, to run to her. But a king who abandoned his post was not a king. He was a corpse waiting for the formality of death. So he stayed. And he fought. And he prayed to gods he did not believe in that Qaeda was enough. That the woman who had survived 3 assassination attempts before her 10th birthday could survive one more. The prayer went unanswered. A runner appeared. young, terrified, one of the few guards whose loyalty had never been in question. "Your Majesty, the Queen's wing. They breached it. Lady Kaida." His voice broke. He did not need to finish. The break said everything. Oren felt something inside him crack, not break. Kings did not break, but crack. A fissure in the foundation that held him upright, that let him be a man instead of a weapon. And the woman, the child, gone, through the servants' passage. We lost their trail in the Undercroft. Gone meant alive, gone meant possible. Gone meant he still had something to fight for beyond pride and thrones and the weight of a crown that suddenly felt meaningless. He looked at the battlefield around him, at the dead and dying, at the empire he had spent his life building now collapsing under the weight of its own corruption, and he made a choice that no king in 6 generations had made. He ran, not toward the throne, not toward victory, toward her. The Undercroft was a maze of tunnels carved into bedrock older than the kingdom itself. Alira stumbled through passages barely wide enough for her shoulders, clutching Theron against her chest, leaving a trail of blood behind her that would make tracking her laughably easy. If anyone was left to do the tracking, if Kaida had bought her enough time, if the world had not already ended and she was just too stubborn to notice, the tunnels branched. She chose left because right felt like death. No logic, just instinct. Her legs gave out. She collapsed against the stone wall, sliding down until she sat in a puddle of her own blood and failure. Theron whimpered. Not crying, just a soft sound that might have been hunger or fear or the simple need to know he was not alone. She looked down at him. His eyes were closed now. He was so small, so fragile. Everything the Empire rejected, everything the throne despised. And yet he was the future, if there was one. Footsteps echoed through the tunnel, multiple sets, moving fast. Alira's hand found the knife Kaida had given her months ago, the one she had practiced with in the crypts until her hands bled, the one that felt less like metal and more like an extension of her will. She could not run, could not hide, so she would fight. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She raised the knife, aimed at shadows, and then a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, bloodied, moving with the controlled violence of a man who had cut through an army to get here. Oren. He saw her, saw the blood, saw Theron clutched against her chest. His face went through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat: relief, horror, rage, and something softer that looked like love filtered through trauma. He dropped to his knees beside her. "You are alive. For now." His hands moved over her, checking wounds, assessing damage with the detachment of someone who had seen too many battlefield injuries to panic. "You are losing too much blood." "I know. We need to move. I cannot." He looked at her, really looked, saw what she was not saying, that moving meant dying faster, that staying meant dying slower, that either way the math was not in her favor. "Then I carry you. You have a kingdom to save. The kingdom is already lost." The words hung in the air between them like smoke after an execution. Oren's voice dropped to something raw, something that might have been honesty or might have been madness. "The Empire betrayed us. The Council. The guards. Even the lords I trusted. They planned this for months, years maybe, and I was so focused on external threats I never saw the rot inside. Ferran. Dozens of others. All coordinating, all waiting." He laughed. It was broken glass scraped across stone. "My brother tried to tell me. Before they killed him, he said the Empire was not worth saving, that it was built on a foundation of cruelty, and it would eventually consume anyone who tried to rule it. I thought he was weak, idealistic, doomed." His eyes met hers. He was right. Alira's hand found his, gripped with what little strength remained. "So we burn it down. We take Theron. We disappear. We let them have their empire, and we build something else. Something better. Somewhere they will never find us." It sounded impossible. It sounded like surrender dressed as wisdom. But before Oren could respond, more footsteps, faster, closer, not soldiers, something worse. A voice echoed through the tunnel. Familiar. Impossible. Kaida. But wrong. The tone was off, the cadence twisted. Alira felt Oren go rigid, felt his hand close around his blade. Kaida emerged from the darkness. She was limping, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but alive, moving. She smiled when she saw them. It was the smile Alira remembered from training, from all those mornings in the crypts, but her eyes were empty. Found you. Oren stood, slowly, positioned himself between Kaida and Alira. Sister, what happened? Kaida tilted her head. The movement was wrong, puppet-like. I made a choice, the same choice our mother made, the same choice every woman in this family makes eventually. I chose survival, real survival, not the kind you get from loyalty and ideals, the kind you buy with betrayal. You were working with them, not at first, but after Crevane died, after you executed him without trial, without mercy, I realized something. You are exactly what they say you are, a tyrant, a weapon, a man who will burn the world to keep his throne. And I decided I did not want to burn with it. Her blade was already moving before she finished speaking. Fast, trained, aimed not at Oren, but at Alira. Because Kaida understood tactics, understood that the way to break a king was not to kill him. It was to kill what he loved. Oren's blade intercepted hers. The clash of steel echoed through the tunnel like a scream. Brother against sister, family against family. The oldest betrayal wearing the oldest face. They fought in silence. No words, no pleas, just the brutal efficiency of two people trained since childhood to kill anything that threatened them. And in that efficiency, Alira saw the truth. Kaida was winning, not through strength, through preparation. She had planned this, had positioned herself perfectly, had spent months learning every weakness, every tell, every moment when Oren's guard dropped because he trusted her. His blade slipped, just an inch, just enough. Kaida's strike would have taken him through the throat if Alira had not moved. She did not think, could not. Her body moved on instinct, honed in crypts and corridors, and the desperate arithmetic of survival. She threw herself forward, knife extended, aimed at the only target she could reach. The blade took Kaida in the side. Not deep, not fatal, but enough. Enough to break concentration, enough to create an opening, enough for Oren to drive his sword through his sister's chest. Kaida looked down at the blade protruding from her ribs, then up at Oren. Her expression was not pain, it was disappointment. You chose her over me, over blood, over family. Oren's voice was dead calm. She is my family now. Kaida laughed. Blood bubbled from her lips. Then you have doomed yourself. Because families built on love do not survive empires built on hate. She collapsed. Oren caught her, lowered her to the stone floor with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the violence that had just occurred. He knelt beside her, watched the light fade from eyes that were the same winter blue as his own. And when she was gone, when the last breath rattled free and silence reclaimed the tunnel, he looked at Alira. We cannot go back. I know. The Empire will hunt us. Everyone who survives tonight will want us dead. The throne, the council, the rebels, all of them. I know. So we run. We hide. We raise our son in shadows and teach him that kingdoms are prisons and thrones are lies, and the only thing worth fighting for is the person beside you. Alira looked at Theron, at Oren, at the future that had become unrecognizable. Then we run. They emerged from the tunnels into the lower city as dawn broke. The streets were chaos. Smoke rose from the palace. Soldiers fought in the market square. Citizens fled in every direction, carrying what they could, abandoning what they could not. No one noticed two more refugees stumbling through the ruins. Oren had stolen a cloak from a dead soldier, wrapped it around Alira and the child. His own armor he left behind. The crown he had worn since his brother's death, he dropped in a gutter where it belonged. They moved through the crowd. Anonymous. Invisible. A woman grabbed Alira's arm, old, toothless, eyes bright with something between fear and ecstasy. The king is dead. They are saying the king is dead and the throne has fallen. We are free. Oren said nothing, just kept moving, kept his hand on Alira's back, kept them moving forward because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant understanding, and understanding meant accepting what they had become. Refugees, exiles, failures. They reached the city gates as the sun cleared the horizon. Behind them, the empire burned. Ahead, the open road stretched toward horizons that held no promises. No guarantees, just the possibility that survival was still an option if they were willing to become something other than what they had been. Alira looked back once, saw the palace silhouette against smoke and flame, saw everything she had fought for reduced to ash and screams. Oren's hand found hers. Do not look back. There is nothing there worth remembering. But she did remember. Would always remember. The woman who walked 400 miles pregnant and terrified. The Omega who sat in the queen's seat and dared an empire to remove her. The mother who held her son while kingdoms fell around her. That woman was not dead. She was just becoming something else. Something the world had no name for yet. They walked through the gates, left the city behind, disappeared into the gray morning like ghosts of a future that would never exist now. And in Alira's arms, Theron opened his eyes and looked at the world he would inherit. Not an empire, not a throne, but something harder, more honest, a chance to be human in a world that had forgotten what that meant. Bachag. 3 days later, in a village so small it did not appear on any map, they stopped. Oren found work as a blacksmith. His hands knew steel, knew fire, knew how to bend metal to will. The villagers asked no questions. Refugees were common. The fall of the capital had sent thousands fleeing. 2 more made no difference. Alira healed slowly. Her body remembered how to knit itself back together. Her mind was slower. At night, she woke screaming, saw Kaida's empty eyes, heard Cravane's laughter, felt the weight of a throne she had touched for mere weeks, but that had marked her permanently. Oren never spoke about the palace, never mentioned the kingdom, never acknowledged that he had been anything other than what he pretended to be now. A man with calloused hands and a quiet wife and a son who would grow up thinking smithing was the family trade. But sometimes, late at night, Alira would wake and find him standing by the window, staring at nothing, his jaw clenched, his hands fisted like he was still holding a blade. And she knew he was counting, calculating, measuring the cost of survival against the price of surrender. One night, she joined him at the window. Theron slept between them in the small cradle Oren had built from scrapwood and hope. Do you regret it? He did not pretend to misunderstand. Every day, every hour. I regret that I did not see the betrayal, that I did not protect you better, that I let my sister become a weapon aimed at everything I should have defended. That is not what I asked. He turned, looked at her, really looked. The way he had that first night in the tavern when he was just a broken man and she was just a woman willing to listen. Do I regret choosing you over the throne? No. Do I regret that the choice cost thousands of lives and an empire that stood for 600 years? Yes. Both things are true. Both things will haunt me until I die. Alira touched his face, felt the stubble, the exhaustion, the weight of everything he carried. Then we make it mean something. We raise Theron to be better than we were, to understand that power without compassion is just cruelty with a crown. And maybe one day, someone will rebuild what we destroyed, and they will do it right this time. Oren pulled her close, not as a king claiming a mate, but as a man holding the only thing that still mattered. And if they find us, if the new regime sends hunters, then we fight, together, the way we should have from the beginning. They stood like that until dawn. 2 people who had lost everything except each other. 2 survivors in a world that rewarded neither strength nor weakness, but only the stubborn refusal to stop breathing. Uwasi. The hunters came 6 weeks later. Not soldiers, assassins, professional, efficient, sent by whoever had seized the throne in the power vacuum Oren's flight had created. They came at night, 3 of them, armed with poison and blades and the cold certainty of people doing a job. Oren killed the first before the man cleared the doorway. The second managed to draw his blade before Oren's hammer, the one he used for shaping steel, caved in his skull. The third got past him, made it to the bedroom where Alira slept with Theron. She woke to a blade at her throat, to cold eyes above a covered face, to the understanding that mercy was not coming. The assassin spoke, voice muffled but clear. "Where is the king? Right behind you." The assassin turned, too slow. Oren's blade took him through the neck. The body hit the floor. Blood spread across wood that Oren had laid himself. Alira sat up. Theron wailed. She picked him up, held him against her chest, felt his heartbeat against hers. They will keep coming. I know. We cannot run forever. No, but we can run long enough. Long enough for what? Oren looked at his son, at the woman who had walked through fire and blood to stand beside him, at the life they had carved from ruins, long enough for him to grow up free, long enough that he never knows what a throne weighs, long enough that when the empire finally collapses, and it will collapse because empires built on cruelty always do, he will be old enough to decide whether to rebuild it or let it stay buried. Alira stood. Her legs were stronger now. Her body remembered what it meant to carry weight. Then we keep moving. New village, new name, new life. As many times as necessary. Oren nodded. He crossed to her, cupped her face, kissed her with the desperation of someone who understood that every moment was borrowed, that survival was not victory, that all they had won was the chance to keep fighting. I love you. I should have said it before. In the palace, when there was still time to make it mean something. You are saying it now, that is enough. They left the village before dawn, took nothing but the clothes on their backs and the child between them, walked into wilderness that had no loyalty to kingdoms or crowns, that did not care about bloodlines or mate marks or destinies written in flesh. Behind them, smoke rose from the cottage. Oren had burned it, destroyed the evidence of their presence, left nothing for the next hunters to track. The road stretched ahead, uncertain, dangerous. A future measured in steps rather than plans, but they walked it together. And in that walking, in that stubborn refusal to surrender, even when surrender was reasonable, even when survival seemed impossible, they became something the empire had never understood. Not rulers, not rebels, not victims, but human, fragile, flawed, fierce, and finally, completely free. 4 months in hiding taught them what the throne never could, that survival stripped away everything except truth. They moved through villages like ghosts learning to haunt, never staying longer than a moon cycle, never making friends, never leaving traces. Oren worked whatever labor would feed them without drawing attention. Blacksmith when there was a forge, farmhand when there was not. His hands, once used to signing death warrants and commanding armies, now carried the calluses of honest work and the permanent ache of humility. Alira healed in fragments. Her body recovered faster than her mind. The physical wounds closed, the mental ones festered. She woke most nights clawing at sheets that were not silk, in rooms that were not palaces, holding a child who would never know he was born to wear a crown. Theron grew. 4 months transformed him from newborn fragility to something more substantial. His eyes had settled into the same winter blue as his father's. His grip was strong. When he cried, which was rarely, it was with a fury that suggested he understood on some cellular level that the world had wronged him before he could even speak. They were in a mountain village, population maybe 200, most of them shepherds, when the messenger found them. Not an assassin this time. Something worse. A child. Maybe 8 years old, thin, dirty, eyes too old for the face carrying them. He appeared at the door of their cottage just after sunset, holding a sealed letter that bore no crest, no marking, nothing except the weight of something inevitable. Oren took the letter. The boy ran before questions could be asked. Inside, a single line written in a hand Oren recognized because he had spent years reading reports penned by those same fingers. Lord Davin's hand, the young idiot from the council who had questioned Alira's worth, who had survived the coup because he was too insignificant to kill and too ambitious to ignore. The message was simple. The king is dead. Long live the king. Return or watch everything burn. Below it, a location. Coordinates in the old tongue. And a date. 7 days from now. Alira read it over his shoulder. Her voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who had run out of surprise. It is a trap, obviously. So we ignore it. Oren was silent for a long time. He stood by the small fire they used for cooking. The flames cast his face in shadow and gold, made him look like the king he had been, the weapon he had chosen to become. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that would kill them or save them, but never leave them unchanged. We cannot ignore it, because they are not offering us a choice. They are telling us the game has new rules, and if we do not play, they will hunt us until Theron is old enough to understand what he lost. Until he grows up asking why his father ran instead of fought. until survival becomes a cage worse than any throne. You're talking about going back. I'm talking about ending this, one way or another. Alira felt cold settle into her bones. Not fear, something colder. The understanding that peace had always been temporary, that the empire was not something you escaped, it was something you confronted or died fleeing. You will be walking into an execution, probably, and you want to do it anyway. He turned, met her eyes. In his gaze, she saw the man she had found in that tavern, broken, grieving, drowning in the weight of a crown. And she saw what he had become in the months since, something harder, leaner, stripped of everything except the core truth of what he was. Not a king, a father, a mate, a man who understood that running only worked until the people you loved could not run anymore. I want to finish what we started. I want to walk back into that palace and face whoever took my throne. I want them to see that you do not break a king by taking his crown. You break him by making him choose between his empire and his family. And I want them to know I chose, and I would choose the same way every single time. His hand found hers, rough palm against rough palm. Two people who had learned that softness was a luxury neither could afford. But I will not do it without you. If you say run, we run. If you say fight, we fight. If you say die, we die, together. The way it should have been from the start. Alira looked at Theron, sleeping in the cradle Oren had built, innocent, unaware, a child who would grow up either free or hunted, but never both. She thought about the woman who had walked 400 miles, who had sat in the queen's seat and dared an empire to remove her, who had survived assassination attempts and betrayals and the birth of a child in the middle of a coup. That woman was not dead. She had just been waiting, learning, becoming something the throne had never anticipated. Not an Omega seeking scraps, but a mother defending what was hers with a ferocity that made dominance hierarchies look quaint. We fight, but not their way. We do not walk into their trap. We make them walk into ours. No. The plan was insanity dressed as strategy. They would return, but not as refugees begging for mercy, as conquerors reclaiming what had been stolen. Oren still had allies. Not many, but revolutions were built on not many. There were lords who had fled when the coup succeeded, soldiers who had escaped the purge, common folk who had watched the palace burn and wondered if the new regime was any better than the old tyranny. The first message went out through channels Oren had established years ago for exactly this scenario. Dead drops in market squares, codes scratched into tavern walls, a network of rebellion that had existed long before he became king because his brother had built it in secret, preparing for the day when the throne would need to be challenged from within. Oren had inherited that network when his brother died, had nearly destroyed it, had considered it treason waiting to happen. Now it was the only thing keeping them alive. The responses came slowly, carefully. People who had survived one coup were wary of joining another, but they came. Lord Heron, old, scarred, a general who had served Oren's father and considered loyalty a religion even when kings did not deserve worship. He brought 80 soldiers, veterans, men who fought because fighting was the only skill the empire had left them. Lady Saris, young, cunning, a merchant princess who had lost 3 trade routes when the coup destabilized the northern territories. She brought gold, contacts, information about the palace defenses, and who currently sat on the throne that should have been Oren's. The answer surprised no one. Lord Davin, the ambitious fool who had questioned Alira's worth, who had aligned himself with the coup and emerged from the chaos as the new power behind a puppet council. He had not claimed the title of king, too smart for that. Instead, he called himself Lord Protector, claimed he was safeguarding the throne until a suitable heir could be found, suitable meaning someone he could control, someone without the mate bond, someone who would not threaten the old order with dangerous ideas about equality and compassion. Alira listened to the reports with cold calculation. She had spent 4 months learning to think like them, to understand that empires were not built on ideals but on fear and leverage, and knowing exactly where to apply pressure until something broke. Davin is afraid. That is why he wants you back. Not to kill you, to legitimize himself. If he executes you publicly, if he makes it look like justice instead of murder, then he becomes the rightful successor, the man who saved the empire from a tyrant. So we do not give him that satisfaction. No, we give him something worse. We give him a choice he cannot win. Oren looked at her. Something like pride flickered across his features. What choice? Between destroying us or proving he is exactly what we claimed he was. A coward using tradition as a weapon. And either way, the people see the truth. Fine. They approached the capital on the 7th day as the sun bled across the horizon. Not with an army. 80 soldiers was not an army. It was a message. They rode in formation. Banners raised. Not the royal crest. That belonged to the old empire. Instead, they flew something new. Something Illyra had designed in the quiet hours while Theron slept, and Oren sharpened blades. A silver wolf on a black field. The wolf was crouched, not attacking, not fleeing, just watching, waiting. The posture of a predator that had learned patience. Beneath it, words in the old tongue. We do not kneel. The city gates were closed, guards lined the walls, archers with arrows knocked. Oren had expected that. What he had not expected was the crowd. Thousands of them. Common folk, merchants, workers. The people the empire existed to exploit and protect in equal measure. They lined the road from the outer wall to the palace gates. Not cheering, not jeering, just watching. Waiting to see if the old king would die with dignity or if something else was possible. Oren stopped 50 yards from the gate, within bow range, within shouting distance, close enough to be heard, close enough to be killed. He dismounted. Illyra did the same. She held Theron against her chest in a sling Oren had crafted. The child was awake, watching. His tiny fist clenched like he was ready to fight enemies he could not yet comprehend. The gate opened, not fully, just enough for a single figure to emerge. Lord Davin. He had aged in 4 months, not physically, but in the way power ages people when they realize the throne weighs more than they expected. His eyes were sunken, his face drawn. He wore fine clothes, but they hung on him like costume jewelry on a corpse. He stopped 10 feet away, close enough for conversation, far enough for safety. His voice carried across the space between them, formal, practiced, the tone of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Oren Vale, you have been charged with abandonment of the throne, dereliction of duty, and conspiracy against the realm. You will surrender yourself for trial or be executed where you stand. Oren did not move. His hand rested on the pommel of his sword. Not threatening, just present. I claim blood right of challenge, single combat. Winner takes the throne. Loser takes the grave. Old law. Older than any council. You cannot refuse without admitting you have no legitimate claim. Davin's face went pale. Blood right of challenge had not been invoked in 3 generations. It was brutal. Final. A return to the old ways when might made right, and thrones were earned with steel instead of votes. That law is archaic, barbaric. We are civilized now. Illyra stepped forward. Her voice was not loud, but it carried, because every person in that crowd was holding their breath. Civilization is what you call it when you win without fighting, when you take thrones through betrayal and call it politics. When you murder children in their beds and call it security. The king offers you barbarism, because at least barbarism is honest. The crowd stirred, not agreement, not yet, but recognition. The understanding that words were being spoken that could not be unspoken. That history was pivoting on this moment. Davin's hands clenched. He looked at Oren, at Illyra, at the child between them. You think you can shame me into fighting you. You think you can make me look weak. I do not need to make you look weak. You did that when you stole a throne instead of earning one, when you sent assassins instead of challenges, when you built your rule on fear because loyalty was too expensive. Oren drew his blade, not to attack, just to make the offer clear. So here is your choice, Lord Protector. Fight me. Win or lose, the people see you tried. Or refuse. Kill us from the walls. Prove you only rule because you are too cowardly to be challenged. Either way, your legitimacy dies today. It was the perfect trap. The kind Illyra had learned to build in 4 months of running. The kind that looked like a choice but was actually a noose disguised as rope. Davin knew it. His eyes flickered to the walls, to the archers, to the easy solution. But he also saw the crowd. saw the way they watched, the way they waited, the way they would remember this moment and repeat it in taverns and homes and marketplaces until the story became legend and legend became judgment. He drew his own blade. The crowd exhaled, a sound like wind through a graveyard. Davin's voice was tight, afraid but committed. Single combat, to the death. Winner rules, no interference, agreed. Elira stepped back, took Theron to where Heron and his soldiers formed a protective circle. She did not speak, did not cry. Just watched as the man she loved walked toward a fight that would end in blood regardless of who won. Because men like Davin did not lose gracefully, and men like Oren did not forgive easily. One of them would die. The only question was which one and what world would remain after. They fought in the shadow of the gates, not in an arena, not with ceremony, just two men with blades and the weight of an empire balanced between them. Davin struck first, fast, trained. His blade was lighter than Oren's, designed for speed over power. The strikes came in flurries, testing, probing, looking for weakness. Oren blocked, parried, did not counter. He was reading, learning, understanding the rhythm of an opponent who had been trained by masters but had never fought someone willing to die, because that was the difference between them. Davin fought to win. Oren fought because losing meant Elira died. Theron died. Everything he had chosen over the throne burned, and a man fighting for that has no space for fear, only clarity. The fight shifted. Oren stopped defending, started attacking. His strikes were economical, brutal, each one aimed not at wounding but at ending, at creating the single opening that would finish this. Davin's confidence cracked. His breathing grew ragged. He was skilled, but he was not a killer. Had never stood on a battlefield and watched friends die. Had never executed a man with his own hands. Had never understood that combat was not technique. It was will. And Oren's will had been forged in fire and loss, and the absolute refusal to let this empire take one more thing from him. The blade slipped past Davin's guard, caught him across the ribs. Not fatal, but enough. Enough to send him stumbling, enough to open him up. Oren's follow-up strike should have ended it, should have taken Davin's head, should have been clean and final and just. But Davin was not fighting alone. The arrow came from the wall, not from a guard, from someone hidden, someone who understood that honor was a luxury tyrants could not afford. It took Oren in the shoulder, punched through leather and muscle and lodged against bone. His sword fell, his body followed. The crowd roared, not in support, in rage. Because they had been promised single combat, promised old laws, promised something that mattered, and they had been given treachery. Again. Elira moved before thought. She was running before the arrow hit the ground, was kneeling beside Oren before the guards could react. Her hands pressed against the wound. Blood poured through her fingers, too much, too fast. Oren's eyes found hers, focused despite the pain, despite the arrow lodged in flesh, despite everything. Run, take Theron, go. No. Elira, I said no. She turned, looked at Davin. The Lord Protector stood with his blade raised, victorious by default, waiting for guards to drag her away, waiting for this to be over so he could rebuild the empire in his image. She stood, slowly. Her dress was soaked in Oren's blood, her hands red, her face a mask of something beyond rage, beyond grief, transcendent fury. Her voice cut across the courtyard like a blade made of sound. You cheated. You invoked the old laws and broke them the moment they did not serve you. That is not strength. That is cowardice wearing a crown. Davin sneered. His fear was masked now by the certainty of armed guards and walls between him and consequences. The old laws are dead, just like your king will be, just like you will be. This empire does not belong to the strong anymore. It belongs to the smart, and I'm smart enough to survive. Elira looked at the crowd, at the thousands watching, at the empire condensed into witnesses. Then I invoke the oldest law, older than combat, older than thrones, the law written in blood and bone, and the mate bond you cannot forge or fake or steal. She ripped open her collar, exposed the mark on her neck. It glowed gold in the fading light, bright enough that even those on the walls could see. I am the king's mate, I carry his bloodline, and by the law of succession, if he falls, the crown passes to me until our heir comes of age. So you do not face a king anymore, Davin. You face a queen, and queens do not need to fight fair." The crowd went silent, not with shock, with recognition, because everyone knew the law. Everyone understood that mate bonds carried weight that councils could not override. That bloodline mattered more than politics, and Davin had just killed the king in front of witnesses, which meant the crown legally passed to Elira, which meant he had not won. He had created a new enemy. Davin's face twisted. He gestured to the guards. "Arrest her, execute her. I do not care. End this." The guards moved, slowly, reluctantly, because orders were one thing, but executing a queen, even one the old regime rejected, was treason. And treason meant history would judge them. Before they could reach her, Heron's soldiers formed a wall. 80 men against 800. Impossible odds, suicidal resistance. They did it anyway. Heron's voice boomed. "You want her? You go through us." And we were trained by the old king, the real one, not the coward hiding behind walls. The guards stopped, not from fear, from doubt. The kind of doubt that spreads like infection when people realize they are on the wrong side of history and history is watching. Davin screamed. Orders, threats, promises, none of it mattered because the moment had shifted. The board had changed. Elira knelt beside Oren again, whispered in his ear, "Stay alive, just stay alive. I will handle the rest." His hand found hers, gripped with what strength remained. "You were always better at this than me. Then let me finish it." The standoff lasted until nightfall. Neither side moved. The guards would not attack without clear orders. Davin would not give orders that might be disobeyed, and Elira would not leave Oren's side even as his breathing grew shallow and his skin turned the color of old parchment. Lady Saris worked on the arrow. Extraction was delicate, deadly if done wrong. She had field medic training from years traveling trade routes where bandits were common and doctors were rare. It took 2 hours. Oren screamed once, bit through leather to keep from screaming again. The arrow came free. The wound was packed, stitched, wrapped, not healed, but survivable. Maybe. As full dark settled, a figure emerged from the palace. Not Davin, someone older, a woman Elira recognized from her brief time in court. Lady Mirren, ancient, neutral, the keeper of bloodline records and the arbiter of succession disputes. She moved slowly, a cane in one hand, a scroll in the other. She stopped between the two groups, looked at Elira, at Oren, at Davin on the walls. Her voice was reedy but carried. "The law is clear, mate bond verified, heir confirmed. If the king is incapacitated, the crown passes to the queen until the heir reaches majority. Lord Davin has no claim. His actions tonight constitute treason, high treason. The penalty is death." Davin's scream echoed off stone. "She is an Omega, a nothing. You cannot give an Omega the throne." Lady Mirren's expression did not change. "I do not give anything. The law gives. I merely record. And the law says mate bonds supersede bloodline, supersede hierarchy, supersede every tradition you claim to defend. If you wish to challenge that law, you should have done so before invoking trial by combat. Now you have legitimized the very rules you seek to break." She turned, walked back toward the palace, paused at the gate. "The coronation will be held at dawn. Queen Elira Vale, first of her name, mate of the fallen king, mother of the heir, defender of the realm. Those who serve report to the throne room. Those who resist will be treated as enemies of the crown." She disappeared into shadow. The guards looked at each other, at Davin, at Elira. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Not surrender, acknowledgement. The understanding that fighting a legal queen was different than fighting a refugee. That history would judge them by what they did next. Most knelt, not to Elira, to the law, to the idea that rules mattered even when they were inconvenient. Davin stood alone on the wall, screaming, raging, but alone. Because tyranny only worked when people chose fear over principle. And tonight, enough people chose differently. They carried Oren into the palace on a stretcher. Elira walked beside him, one hand on his chest. feeling for the heartbeat that proved he was still alive, still fighting. The throne room was exactly as she remembered, stone and shadow, and the weight of 600 years pressing down like judgment. The throne itself sat empty, waiting, demanding. Illyra looked at it. At the seat she had claimed months ago when claiming it meant rebellion, when sitting there had been defiance instead of duty. Now it was both. Lady Myron stood beside it, the crown in her hands. Not Oren's war crown, the old crown, the one worn during coronations, heavy, gold, inscribed with words in the old tongue that promised power and demanded sacrifice in equal measure. Kneel. Illyra knelt, not because the law demanded it, but because Theron was in her arms and she could not hold him and stand and accept the weight of what came next. Lady Myron placed the crown on her head, spoke the old words, the ones that bound ruler to realm. That made personal will secondary to collective need. That transformed a person into a symbol. Rise, Queen Illyra, first of her name. May your rule be just. May your reign be long. May your enemies remember that queens are forged in fire and those who test them burn. Illyra stood. The crown was heavier than expected, but she had carried heavier, had carried a child across 400 miles, had carried the weight of Oren's choice when he picked her over empire, had carried the knowledge that survival required becoming something the throne never anticipated. She turned, faced the assembled court, the lords who had knelt, the soldiers who had chosen law over orders, the common folk who had pushed into the hall to witness history. Her voice was not loud, but it filled every corner. This empire was built on cruelty, on hierarchies that crushed the weak to elevate the strong, on traditions that claimed birth determined worth. My son was born to rule, but he will not rule like his ancestors. He will rule in a realm where Omega and Alpha are words, not destinies, where power serves people instead of consuming them, where queens can rise from taverns and kings can choose love over thrones. She looked down at Oren, still breathing, still alive, still hers, and those who resist that future will learn what the old regime learned tonight, that the lowest can rise, that fate does not bow to fear, that change is not weakness, it is the only strength that matters. The court was silent, processing, calculating, deciding whether this was revolution or suicide. Before they could choose, the doors burst open, not guards, not soldiers. Davin, alone, blade drawn, face twisted with the rage of someone who had lost everything and decided if he could not rule, no one would. He charged. Not at Illyra, at Theron, because he understood. The child was the legitimacy. Kill the heir, the succession collapsed. Kill the heir, chaos returned. Kill the heir, he might still claim the throne from the ruins. Illyra moved, faster than thought. She shoved Theron at Lady Myron, drew the knife at her hip, the one Qaeda had given her, the one she had practiced with until her hands bled. Davin's blade came down, aimed at where Theron had been, found Illyra's knife instead. Steel met steel. The impact shattered up her arm. She was not strong enough, not trained enough, could not match him in strength or skill. But she was a mother defending her child. And mothers do not lose because the odds are bad. They lose because they stop fighting. She did not stop. The knife twisted, found flesh. Davin screamed. His blade fell. Illyra's knife drove up under his ribs, found his heart with the precision of someone who had spent 4 months learning that survival meant knowing exactly where to strike. Davin collapsed. Blood pooled. His eyes locked on hers, disbelieving, shocked that an Omega could kill him, that the hierarchy he believed in had failed at the moment it mattered most. Illyra stood over him, watched him die, felt nothing except the cold certainty that this was necessary, that mercy was a luxury and empires were built on the bones of people who hesitated. When he stopped breathing, she turned back to the court, still holding the bloody knife, still wearing the crown, still standing because falling was not an option. Her voice was iron over ice. Anyone else? Silence, the kind that settles after battles, after executions, after moments when the world shifts and everyone understands nothing will ever be the same. Illyra took Theron back from Lady Myron, held him against her chest, looked at Oren, still unconscious but alive, still breathing, and she sat on the throne. Not because she wanted it, but because someone had to. because empires did not save themselves, because the only way to change what kings built was to become a queen willing to burn it down and rebuild from ash. The court knelt, not willingly, not with love, but with recognition that power had shifted and resistance was death. And in the shadows at the edge of the hall, soldiers began arriving. Not Heron's 80, hundreds more, thousands. The ones who had fled when the coup happened, the ones who had been waiting for a sign that the old king still mattered. That loyalty was not suicide. They saw Elira, saw the crown, saw Davin's corpse, saw everything they needed to see, and they knelt, not to tradition, not to hierarchies, but to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the empire could be something other than a machine that ate its children. Elira looked at them, at the army assembling, at the future taking shape in real time, and she understood. The fight was not over, it was only beginning. Because ruling was harder than surviving. Because change required more than killing tyrants. It required building something better from the ruins they left behind. She stood, crown on her head, child in her arms, husband bleeding on a stretcher beside the throne. And she spoke the words that would define her reign. Send word to every province, every village, every person who has suffered under the old ways. Tell them the throne has new rules. Tell them Omegas can rule. Tell them hierarchy is dead and what matters now is what you do, not what you were born to be. She paused. Let the weight settle. And tell them the queen does not forgive traitors, does not negotiate with cowards, and will burn the empire to ash before letting it return to what it was. Starting now. The throne room erupted, not in cheers, in the chaos of people realizing revolution was not an idea anymore. It was happening, real, immediate, unstoppable. And at the center of it all, Elira sat with a child in her arms and violence in her eyes, and the cold understanding that she had not walked 400 miles to build a kingdom. She had walked them to destroy one, and what came next would be written in blood and will and the stubborn refusal to let the old ways win. Even if winning meant becoming exactly what the throne had always demanded, a weapon. But this time, a weapon aimed at the right targets. The empire did not fall in a day. It bled slowly, reluctantly, fighting every reform, like a body rejecting a transplant. Elira ruled from a throne that felt less like power and more like penance. Every morning began with reports of resistance. Lords refusing to recognize her authority, provinces declaring independence, soldiers deserting. The machinery of 600 years did not simply stop because a queen demanded it. It ground forward on momentum and tradition and the desperate need of those in power to remain there. But momentum could be redirected, tradition could be rewritten, and people in power could be removed. She started with the council, dissolved it entirely. The old lords who had survived Davin's coup and her own ascension were given a choice: swear fealty to the new order or retire to their estates with their heads still attached to their shoulders. Most chose retirement. 3 chose defiance. Their executions were public, quick. Elira did not enjoy them, but she had learned in 4 months of running and 4 weeks of ruling that mercy to the unrepentant was just delayed cruelty to everyone else. That sometimes the only way to save a kingdom was to cut out the rot, even when the rot wore noble titles and claimed ancient rights. The people watched. Some cheered, some wept. Most just calculated whether this new queen was better or worse than the tyrants before her, whether revolution was improvement or just a different flavor of oppression. Elira did not try to convince them with words. She convinced them with actions. The first law she passed abolished the hierarchy designations at birth. No more alpha, beta, omega stamped onto infants like brands determining their worth. People would be judged by what they did, not what biology declared them. The resistance was immediate, violent. Lords claimed she was destroying the natural order. That chaos would follow, that the empire would collapse without the structure that had sustained it for centuries. She let them speak. Then she reminded them that the old structure had produced 6 assassination attempts on her life, 3 coups in as many years, and a kingdom so fractured that entire provinces were currently in open rebellion. The natural order, she informed them, had failed. Spectacularly. Time to try something unnatural. The second law established councils in every province. Elected councils. Not appointed by nobles, but chosen by the people who actually lived there and understood what they needed. It was radical, unprecedented. terrifying to everyone who had spent their lives believing power flowed downward from thrones to subjects. But Illyra had learned something in those months of hiding, that the people in villages and farms and market squares had more practical wisdom than any court, that they understood survival in ways nobles never would, because their mistakes did not result in lost profits, they resulted in starvation. So she gave them power, and watched to see if they would use it to destroy themselves or build something better. The answer surprised even her. Ch-ch-cham. Oren woke 3 weeks after the coronation. The wound had festered. Fever had nearly killed him twice. Lady Saris had worked miracles with medicines and stubbornness and the grim understanding that if the former king died, the fragile coalition holding the empire together would shatter. But he survived, because Oren Vale was too stubborn to die and too broken to know when dying would be easier. Illyra was there when he opened his eyes. She had barely left his side except to attend council sessions and sign execution orders and pretend she knew what she was doing. Theron slept in a cradle beside the bed, 5 months old now, growing fast, already reaching for things, already showing the determination that came from both his parents. Oren's first words were not poetic, not romantic, just brutally honest. "You look terrible." Illyra laughed. It sounded like breaking glass, but it was real. "You look dead." "So I win. What happened? I became queen, executed 3 lords, started a revolution. The usual." He tried to sit up. His body refused. Pain flashed across his face, but he pushed through it because Oren did not know how to stop pushing, even when pushing was suicide. Illyra pressed him back down, gently, firmly. "Rest. The empire will still be falling apart tomorrow." "Is it falling apart?" She considered lying, decided truth was harder but more useful. "Yes, but differently than before. It is falling apart because I am forcing change instead of preserving rot. Some provinces have embraced the reforms. Others are preparing for civil war. And everyone is waiting to see if the queen who killed Lord Davin will be strong enough to hold what she claimed. And will you be?" She looked at him. At the man who had been a king and was now just a man, who had chosen her over empire and survived long enough to see what that choice had wrought. "I do not know, but I'm going to try. Because the alternative is watching Theron grow up in a kingdom that despises him for being born from an Omega. And I did not survive everything we survived to let that happen." Oren's hand found hers. His grip was weak but present. "Tell me what you need." She almost laughed, almost cried, almost screamed that what she needed was for this to be easier, for power to come with instructions, for ruling to be something other than an endless series of impossible choices where every decision saved some people and condemned others. Instead, she said the truth. "I need you to heal, to stand beside me. Not as a king. That title is gone. But as a partner. As someone who understands what it costs to hold an empire together when the empire wants to tear itself apart. I can do that. Can you? You spent your life being the weapon, the throne, the symbol. Can you be something else? Someone who supports instead of commands, who advises instead of rules." His eyes held hers. In them she saw the man from the tavern, the one who had been drowning in grief and duty, who had forgotten how to be anything except what the crown demanded. But she also saw something new, something forged in 4 months of hiding and 3 weeks of unconsciousness, the understanding that strength was not refusing to break. It was learning how to rebuild after breaking. "I spent my entire life being told I had to be strong, had to be dominant, had to be the blade that cut through problems, and it made me powerful, but it also made me blind, made me miss the betrayals, made me lose my brother, made me nearly lose you." He squeezed her hand. "So yes, I can be something else, because being a weapon almost killed us both, and I am tired of killing things I want to protect." The reforms continued, slowly, bloodily. Every change Illyra made was contested by someone. Every law she passed was tested by lords who believed she would eventually break or compromise or reveal herself to be just another tyrant in different clothing. She did not break, did not compromise, but she did prove them partially right. Because ruling did require tyranny, not the casual cruelty of the old regime, but the calculated violence of someone willing to destroy the present to build a future. She executed 12 more lords in the first year, disbanded 3 noble houses, confiscated lands and redistributed them to the people who actually worked them. It was not justice. Justice was clean. This was messy, complicated. The kind of change that required breaking things that could not be fixed and hoping what grew from the ruins was better than what came before. Some nights she wondered if she had become exactly what she had sworn to destroy. If revolution was just tyranny with better marketing. If the only difference between her and Davin was that she believed her own justifications. Oren would find her on those nights, standing by the window, staring at the city below where lights flickered like stars fallen to earth. He did not offer platitudes, did not tell her she was wrong to doubt. He just stood beside her, silent, present. A reminder that she was not alone even when the weight felt unbearable. One night, after a particularly brutal council session where she had ordered the execution of a lord who had been funding rebel factions, she finally broke, not with tears, with words. I am becoming them. The tyrants. The ones who believe the end justifies the means. Who measure success in bodies and broken traditions. How is that different? How am I not just another ruler who uses violence to enforce vision? Oren was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had asked himself the same question and found no easy answers. You're different because you doubt, because you question, because you lie awake at night wondering if you are the villain in someone else's story. Tyrants do not do that. They sleep soundly because they believe they are always right. You know you might be wrong, and you do it anyway because the alternative is letting the old system continue. And that system was grinding people into dust for 600 years. But how many more people do I grind before I am just as bad? I do not know. Nobody knows. That is the hell of ruling. You make choices with incomplete information and live with the consequences. And the only thing that separates a good ruler from a bad one is whether you care about those consequences or just about keeping power. Do you think I am good? He looked at her. Really looked. With eyes that had seen her at her worst and her best and everywhere in between. I think you are human, flawed, terrified, making mistakes and trying to fix them. I think you are doing something nobody in this kingdom has done in generations. You are trying to build something better instead of just preserving what exists. And that is harder than being good. That is choosing to be necessary, even when necessary looks like cruelty. Mect. Theron took his first steps on the anniversary of the coup that had destroyed the old regime. It was symbolic in a way Alira had not planned, as if the child understood that standing required falling first, that progress was just controlled stumbling forward until you learned to move without collapsing. He walked from Alira to Oren across the private quarters they had claimed as their own. Not the royal chambers. Those were too large, too formal, too full of ghosts and expectations. Instead, they lived in rooms that had once housed servants, small, functional, human-sized. Theron wobbled, fell, got back up, wobbled again, made it 3 steps before gravity won. Oren caught him, lifted him into the air. Theron laughed. The sound was pure, uncomplicated by politics or power or the weight of a name that carried too much history. Alira watched them, father and son, king and prince, man and child, all of those and none of those. Just 2 people learning how to be a family in a world that had never made space for families like theirs. Later that night, after Theron was asleep and the palace had settled into the uneasy quiet that came with kingdoms in transition, Alira and Oren sat together in the small garden behind their quarters. It was not grand, not the sprawling royal gardens with fountains and statues and flowers bred for beauty over resilience. This was wild, uncontrolled, plants that grew because they wanted to, not because gardeners forced them into patterns. Alira had claimed it as her own, a place where the queen did not exist, where she could just be a woman trying to figure out how to be a mother and a partner and a human when the empire demanded she be a symbol. Oren broke the silence first. Do you regret it? Any of it? She considered the question, really considered it, let herself trace the path from tavern to throne, from invisible to unavoidable, from survival to sovereignty. I regret the deaths, the ones I caused and the ones I could not prevent. I regret that change requires violence, that building something better means destroying what exists. I regret that Theron will grow up knowing his mother executed people and wondering if that makes her a hero or a monster. She paused, looked at him. But I do not regret choosing you. I do not regret walking through those gates. I do not regret fighting for the chance to be seen as something other than what I was born to be. Because even with all the blood and betrayal and impossibility, I would rather be here, broken and terrified and trying, than back in that tavern, invisible and safe and slowly dying from being nothing. Oren's hand found hers. His thumb traced the mate mark on her wrist, the one that had started everything, the symbol that had given her legitimacy but also made her a target. I spent my entire life believing strength was dominance, that power meant control, that a good king was one who never showed weakness. And it made me strong. But it also made me alone, made me trust no one, made me see every person as either a tool or a threat. He looked at her. You taught me that strength is not refusing to break. It is healing after you break. That power is not control. It is choosing what you protect and burning everything that threatens it. That a good ruler is not someone who never shows weakness. It is someone who shows weakness and survives anyway because the people around them refuse to let them fall. So no, I do not regret choosing you. I regret that it took me so long, that my brother had to die before I learned the lesson he tried to teach, that we had to lose everything before I understood that some things are worth more than thrones. They sat in silence, not the uncomfortable silence of people with nothing to say, the comfortable silence of people who had said everything that mattered and were content to just exist together. Look, the Civil War came 18 months into Alira's reign, not the scattered resistance of lords clinging to privilege. A coordinated rebellion. 4 provinces. Backed by foreign gold and the remnants of the old council. Led by Lord Cravane's grandson, a man named Torian who had spent his youth watching his grandfather's execution and his adulthood planning revenge. He was smart, tactical. He did not attack the capital, did not try to storm the palace. Instead, he built an alternative, declared the Northern Territories independent, offered sanctuary to anyone who rejected the new order, promised a return to tradition, to hierarchy, to the comfortable certainty of knowing your place and accepting it. Thousands flocked to him, not because they loved the old ways, but because change was exhausting, because revolution required everyone to adapt and adaptation was hard, and some people would rather submit to familiar cruelty than risk unknown freedom. Alira stood in the war room surrounded by maps and generals and the grim arithmetic of armies. She had 80,000 soldiers loyal to the crown. Torian had 50,000, not enough to win through direct assault, but enough to bleed her forces slowly, to turn this into a war of attrition where both sides lost and whoever survived claimed victory over ruins. Oren studied the maps. He was healed now, fully. The shoulder would never be perfect, but it was functional. He moved like someone who had forgotten how to be comfortable, who had learned that pain was just information and you worked through information. He tapped the Northern Territories. He cannot hold them. The logistics do not work. He has foreign gold but no infrastructure. His soldiers are eating through supplies faster than he can replenish. If we cut the supply lines here and here, he collapses within 3 months. Alira shook her head. 3 months is too long. Every day this continues, more people die. More provinces consider joining him. More of the fragile peace we built fractures. So what do you propose? She looked at the map, at the territories marked in red, at the symbols representing armies and supply lines and the human cost of every strategic decision. I go to him, personally, offer terms. He wants the old ways? Fine. We partition the kingdom, north for tradition, south for reform. Let people choose where they want to live. Let time prove which system works better. The room erupted, generals shouting, advisors arguing, everyone pointing out that partitioning the empire was surrender, that it legitimized rebellion, that it set a precedent where anyone unhappy with reform could just declare independence and force negotiation. Alira let them speak. Then she spoke louder. You are right. It is surrender, but not to Torian, to reality. The reality is that 600 years of tradition do not vanish because a queen commands it, that half the empire would rather die preserving the old ways than live adapting to new ones, That I can kill Torian and his army, and 10 more rebellions will rise because the idea of hierarchy is not something you can execute. She looked at each of them. So we stop trying to force unity. We let them have their hierarchy, their traditions, their comfortable cruelty, and we build something better here. We prove that freedom works, that people do not need masters, and we let the results speak. Oren stepped beside her. His voice was calm. Final. The Queen has spoken. Prepare the envoy. We ride north in 3 days. The meeting took place in neutral territory, an abandoned fortress between the territories. Both sides brought guards. Both sides brought contingencies. Both sides knew this could end in peace or blood, depending on words that had not been spoken yet. Torian waited in the central hall. He was younger than Elira expected, maybe 30. Dark hair, sharp features, eyes that carried the weight of someone who had spent his life preparing for revenge and was now close enough to taste it. He did not bow, did not acknowledge her title, just stared across the stone floor like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be negotiated with. Elira spoke first. Your grandfather tried to kill me. You are trying to destroy what I built. We can continue this, fight for years, bleed the kingdom until nothing remains worth ruling. Or we can be smarter than the generations before us. Torian's voice was cold, controlled. You destroyed the empire, dissolved the council, executed lords, abolished the hierarchies that held this kingdom together for 600 years. And you call that smart. I call it necessary. The old system was rotting, eating itself. Your grandfather was not trying to preserve tradition. He was trying to preserve his power. And when that power was threatened, he chose treason. That is not strength, that is desperation. And you are not desperate. A queen who rose from nothing, who holds power only because of a mate bond you claim is legitimate, who rules through violence and calls it reform. Elira did not flinch. Yes, I am desperate. I am violent. I am everything you claim, but I am also honest about it. I do not pretend my violence is natural law. I do not claim the gods ordained my rule. I took power because the alternative was watching my son grow up in a kingdom that would crush him for being born to the wrong mother. And I will keep that power through whatever means necessary, including compromise. She pushed a document across the table. Torian glanced at it, read. His expression did not change, but his hands tightened on the parchment. Partition. You are offering me the North, full autonomy, the right to maintain the old hierarchies, no interference from the crown, in exchange for peace, no more rebellions, no more foreign gold-funding insurrection. You rule your way, I rule mine, and we let history judge which system survives. Torian looked up, met her eyes. Why? Why would you give up half the empire? Because I'm not trying to build an empire. I'm trying to build a place where my son can grow up free, where people are not crushed under the weight of what they were born as. If you want to preserve the old ways in the North, fine. But you do it without forcing the South to submit, without using violence to impose your vision. And if my system proves better, if people flee your reforms and beg to return to tradition, then I was wrong. And I will live with that. But at least we will know. At least we will have tried something other than endless war. Torian was silent for a long time, calculating, weighing, trying to find the trap hidden in the offer. Finally, he spoke. I want it in writing, signed by you, by the old lords who remain, by foreign witnesses. I want guarantees that you will not march south in 5 years and claim I violated terms. Done. But I want the same. No funding rebellions in my territory, no assassinations, no proxy wars. We end this or we commit to destroying each other. No middle ground. Torian studied her. This woman who had walked from nothing into power, who had survived everything the empire threw at her and was now offering him peace instead of demanding surrender. He signed, not because he trusted her, but because continuing the war meant risking everything on uncertain victory. And pragmatism, in the end, trumped pride. Basics. The partition held, barely, uncomfortably, with frequent violations and constant tensions and the understanding that peace was just deferred war. But it held. The North returned to hierarchy. Alphas ruled. Omegas submitted. The old ways were preserved like museum pieces. Beautiful to those who loved tradition, horrifying to those who knew the cost. The South experimented. Elected councils governed. Hierarchies were abolished. People rose and fell based on merit and luck and the chaotic mathematics of freedom. It was messy, inefficient, full of mistakes and corruption and the understanding that democracy was just organized arguing with occasional violence. But it was alive, growing, changing, and slowly, painfully, it worked. Elira ruled for 20 years, long enough to see Theron grow into a man who understood power but did not worship it. Long enough to watch the South prosper while the North stagnated. Long enough to prove that the lowest could rise not through fate, but through will. She stepped down when Theron turned 21, not because she was forced to, but because she had learned that power corrupted not through evil, but through comfort. That the moment you stopped questioning your right to rule was the moment you became the tyrant you had overthrown. So she walked away, gave the crown to her son, returned to the small cottage where she and Oren had hidden all those years ago, the one they had burned to hide their tracks. Someone had rebuilt it, kept it as a monument, a reminder that queens could come from anywhere and kings could choose love over empires. They lived there, quietly. Two people who had once held a kingdom and learned that the only thing worth holding was each other. Geese. Oren died first, 15 years after Elira stepped down. The wound from Davin's arrow had never fully healed. Infections came and went, each one taking a little more. He went peacefully, in his sleep, Elira beside him. His last words were not profound, just true. We did it. Against everything. We did it. She held him until his heartbeat stopped, until the warmth left, and all that remained was memory and the mate mark on her wrist that still glowed faint gold, even though the bond was one-sided now. She did not cry, not then. There would be time for tears later. For now, she just held him and remembered. The broken man in the tavern, the king who chose her over empire, the father who taught their son that strength was not dominance, the partner who stood beside her when standing was all they could do. All of it, every moment, every choice, every impossible decision that had brought them from nothing to everything, and back to nothing again. It was enough. Elira lived another 10 years, long enough to see Theron's children born, long enough to watch the South grow into something unrecognizable from the empire she had inherited, long enough to understand that change was not an event, it was a process. Slow, painful, never finished. She died in the same cottage where Oren had, in the same bed, looking out the same window at mountains that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. Her last thought was not of thrones or power or the weight of crowns. It was of a tavern, a broken man, a moment of kindness that had changed everything, and she smiled. Because in the end, that was what mattered, not the empires built or destroyed, not the laws passed or wars won, but the choice to see someone as human when the world told you they were nothing. That was the real revolution, the one that could not be undone by coups or betrayals or the slow grinding of history. The choice to love when loving was rebellion. To stand when standing meant death. To fight not for power, but for the chance to be human in a world that worshipped strength. She had walked 400 miles for that chance, had killed for it, had bled for it, had ruled and suffered and sacrificed for it. And in the end, she had won. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but completely. The empire she left behind was not what she had intended. It was better and worse, and human in ways the old regime never understood. Because the true price of the crown was never blood. It was the courage to admit you did not have all the answers, to rule while doubting, to wield power while knowing it could corrupt, to change what kings built while understanding you might be wrong. That was the lesson. The one written in scars and mate marks, and the stubborn refusal to let destiny write the ending. That the lowest could rise, that fate could be challenged, that love was not weakness, it was the only strength that mattered when everything else burned. And as Elira's eyes closed for the last time, as the mate mark on her wrist finally dimmed to nothing, as the story reached its inevitable conclusion, the empire remembered. Not as history written by victors, but as a truth that could not be erased no matter how many generations tried. That a woman walked 400 miles carrying a child and a hope. That she stood before a throne and refused to kneel, that she became a queen not through birthright, but through will. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the world changes because one person decides surviving is not enough. They want to live, and they refuse to let anyone stop them, even if it costs everything, even if it breaks them, even if the price is an empire burned to ash and rebuilt from ruins. Because in the end, that is what it means to be human, not to dominate, not to submit, but to choose, to fight, to love fiercely and fail spectacularly and get back up anyway. And that lesson, that impossible, brutal, beautiful lesson, was worth more than any crown. It was worth everything.